stop, never believe them.
Please let me
to
talk.
infinity.
I'm actually dying.
And so, without further ado, I'm going to read the rules of the debate. My panel is moderated slightly differently than some other panels on Twitch. There's slightly more rules, so I'm going to read them through right now for the purpose of our panelists and for anyone out there in the audience. If you think I am modding incorrectly or poorly or not following my own rules, please feel free to maul about it and let me know later. The rules are: everyone gets an intro and outro of 90 seconds, uninterrupted for each topic.
Can you guys all hear right now?
After that, we use a list system.
Is it all good?
So raise your hand, I'll give you a signal, normally a thumbs up, that you're on the list. Once you're on the list, we'll go down the list, crossing off names as we go. You can raise your hand as often as you want, but if you're already on the list, I'm not going to put your name on the list twice. Gish galloping is really stupid, and it makes conversations impossible to have. So keep your speaking time to under 2 minutes at a time, aside from intros and outros. I'll give you a signal. I'll do like this little like circle thing on my ear. I'm not calling you crazy. I'm just saying that you have 30 seconds left. And then at 10 seconds left, I'll do it again, and I'll keep going until we hit 2 minutes. I'll tell you to finish your point, and then if you keep going, I'm just going to cut you off. Interruptions, sometimes please try not to interrupt someone while they're speaking in like a regular time. If you have a question that you want to bring up or a specific contention, say quick response after they finish talking. You can skip the list, you can get in, try and keep those short. If you have to have a back and forth with somebody, that's totally fine. If it goes longer than say 5 or 6 minutes, I'll probably drag it back to the list. So, and then if someone explicitly calls you out by name, you are welcome to respond with the normal time frame of 2 minutes. You can skip the list. It doesn't affect your position on the list. As I said before, I am not going to be participating in this. I am only going to be moderating. So I'm not going to be saying anything about any of these topics. So the topics of conversation. The first thing we're going to be hitting in the first topic is, should the left critically support any group that opposes American imperialism or interests, or is there a line to be drawn at ideologies, beliefs, or stated goals of entities such as Hamas, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the Chinese Communist Party? If so, where would that line be? We are going to go in order for the intros and outros. If someone goes first, I give them both the first word and the last word of the outro because they say before they go before anyone else, so everyone gets to respond to them. So I give them the last word so everyone can respond so they can respond to everyone else. So we are going to start with Lena, then to Spectre, then to Charlotte, then to Destiny, then to Haz, and then to Eris. So with that in mind, 90 seconds uninterrupted on the clock.
And guys, my avatar is going to be really messed up right now because my computer's just doing so much at once. I need to figure out a better system.
Critical support for parties fighting pragmatics and responsibility. I am assuming for this that the person in question lives in the U.S. Or how much America sort of meddles in that. So for Palestine, it is your responsibility, but for say some other locale that isn't as affected by American actions, it's a lot less. But also, there's a bunch of other factors, such as, I'm done. Sorry.
No problem at all. All right, Spectre.
Right. So I'm just gonna. The short answer is no. We shouldn't support parties, organizations, or anything just because it's opposed to American interest. Sometimes American interests are actually good. Sometimes America is trying to do the correct thing. In those cases, I don't think that we should support these people. And even when America isn't necessarily doing the correct thing, and the organization itself is bad, engaging in political extremism, hurting the population in the country that they're claiming to help, using anti-Semitic rhetoric, using any kind of yikesy stuff like that, I think that's enough that, maybe leftists shouldn't be critically supporting those groups.
All right. Thank you, Spectre. Charlotte.
Yeah, the question of should it be just unequivocal, no limit, no bars, right? Just unlimited critical support for literally any group that opposes American hegemony and American imperialism. This is obviously no, because the point of supporting a group is that you believe that if this group is to be victorious in their goals, they would create a situation or an environment which is more positive than the United States. But there are obviously groups that exist that if they were to get into power, say, for example, like the Taliban or Boko Haram, these groups, right, while they technically oppose American hegemony and American imperialism in their regions, if they were to get into control, right, with no opposition, they would create a situation in their region which is much worse than American hegemony.
All right. Thank you, Charlotte. Destiny?
Yeah, I mean, we should have like some foundational set of values that we use to figure out whether we think the actions of some country or some international foreign effort is good or bad. And it should probably be a little bit more fleshed out than are they pro or anti-America. We can think of groups that are opposed to America, that we don't have any ideological similarities to, that we probably wouldn't want to support over America. And then there are times where we could be critical of American foreign policy, not just because it's American foreign policy, but because we can appeal to some like standard that we feel like America isn't living up to in said foreign policy.
All right. Thank you, Destiny. Haz?
There is no precedent in the history of international law that enshrines or recognizes what's called American imperialism. So insofar as America is engaging in imperialist aggression, it is circumventing the established post-war convention nations have agreed to enter into terms with that decides the manner by which nations are going to relate to one another, one of which being the right to national self-determination. So the question is a bit strange because it's like if America is going to commit a crime and people are going to resist that crime, should those people be supported? Well, the burden rests on the party committing the original crime to justify itself. I have no obligation to, quote unquote, rescind support, critical or otherwise, to groups resisting it because American imperialism doesn't have any legitimacy to begin with. So that's my position.
All right. Thank you, Haz. All right. So Eris is the last person speaking. So we are going to start allowing the hand raising stuff. So while she's talking, start raising your hand if you want to get on the list, and then we can go from there. So Eris, 90 seconds on the clock. Go ahead. And then Lena, I see you. I'll put you on top of the list.
Wait,
So,
could you
go ahead.
could you ask the question again? Sorry, because I was a little confused by it.
Oh, no problem at all. All right. So the question is, should the left critically support any group that opposes American imperialism/interest, or is there a line to be drawn at ideologies, beliefs, or stated goals of entities such as Hamas, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the Chinese Communist Party? If so, where are those lines? We can have like a basic talk about general imperialism. If you want to start talking about specific entities, whether it's like Hamas or China or Korea, you're welcome to start doing that. So go ahead.
Okay, the first sentence, can you just repeat the first sentence? He said it really, really quickly.
Sorry, Eris. Should the left critically support any group that opposes American imperialism/interests, or is there a line to be drawn at ideologies, beliefs, or stated goals of entities such as Hamas, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, or the Chinese Communist Party?
All right, so I'm not American, so I'm not going to tell Americans what to support or not. I mean, it totally depends on everyone's value systems. To me, what makes the most sense is you can support, say, like a group having resistance against something that you consider American imperialism or any other kind of like oppression or something that you're wrong, and still acknowledge that there are severe problems with that group. And at the same time, you don't need to view things in like black and white. So just because the enemy of the enemy is like, it doesn't necessarily make them your friend. Someone can replace a bad system with an even worse system, as we saw as a consequence of American imperialism regularly. So that seems like such a childlike view of viewing the world. And I have a feeling that even the people in this room, like no one actually subscribes to that. But yeah, I'm interested in hearing people's perspectives.
Thank you, Eris. Again, that's why the second part of the question was where should the line, if it needs to be drawn, should be drawn at in regards to different groups. So right now the list has Lena on it, and then everyone else, if you want to get in, start raising your hand. So Lena, go ahead.
So I'd like to look at the question specifically. This term used was critical support. And I think everyone here is interpreting that as like unconditional support when the term itself quite literally contradicts that. It's critical support. It is support with criticism. It's not unconditional. It's not uncritical. And in addition, fundamentally, when you support American imperialist actions abroad, regardless of if you think like the overall subjective consequences of that are good, you are still legitimizing an act which is in of itself immoral. You're justifying military intervention or economic intervention in a way which gives legitimacy to the idea that America is allowed to just do whatever it wants. So any support of that imperial structure is immoral. It's wrong. There's no circumstance. You don't have to support every group, mind, but there's no circumstances in which American imperialism is, in the long run, good.
All right. Thank you, Lena. We're going to go to Haz.
I think we should also pay very specific attention to this word support, because as it happens, there does exist a rules-based international order in which some kind of common agreement is held between sovereign nations about what rules they're going to be following. So when we say, should we support them? It's kind of a difficult question, because what does that actually mean? If you mean to say that,
I'll kill you guys if you do sing
for
that.
example,
Like, I will actually kill you.
Okay? North Korea has no right to defend itself against illegal aggression by America. The question stands as to what kind of international what kind of framework from the perspective of international law are you proposing or coming up? Because what you're in effect proposing is some kind of global government led by America that's going to decide what is or isn't allowed. I know people find many groups and countries problematic, but the step from your personal opinion about them to support or not support is something that's going to be arbitrated at the level of something like international law, because otherwise you have no power you have no jurisdiction to exercise authority over them.
All right. Thank you, Haz. Right now, no one's on the list. Would anyone like to respond to that?
Right. So I don't think anybody was confused about the definition of critically support. I think that we all understand that means. I hope we all understand that means like you're supporting a group, but you have criticisms of it. I think that my contention is with a lot of online leftists in particular is they seem to think that you can critically support anything that is opposing American interest, just due to the fact that it opposes American interest bad. The issue with this is that you end up supporting groups that won't even get the result that they claim that they're wanting. A good example of this would be Hamas, right? This is like an Islamic extremist faction that is mostly using violence to accomplish their ends in a situation where, and I mean, leftists should get this, it's the basic like master-slave dialectic here. It's not going to get them the results they want. Palestine is going to lose that fight if they resort to violence. Better organizations in the area to support would be something like Fatah. If you're really wanting to just, find a Palestinian party to throw your weight behind. But to be very frank, I think that, the Hamas situation, in addition to like even the North Korea and the CPC situation, leftists just kind of see what the discourse is that week. They figure out what the talking points for their particular faction are, and they just like figure out how hot of a take they can fire off on Twitter as quickly as possible without actually learning anything about the topic. So yeah, I guess that would be more what I was expecting to get into here.
All right. Thank you, Spectre. We're going to throw it to Lena, then Haz, and then Eris. So go ahead, Lena.
I would like to point to a couple things in that statement. First of all, no individual should ever, as if it's up to any individual outside of Palestine who they support. But regardless, Fatah is a bloating, aging, corrupt organization which has defrauded and oppressed the Palestinian people. It's fundamentally just the party of Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas. He has not allowed elections to go through since the 2006 election because Hamas won. Hamas was elected because it was essentially the only anti-Fatah bloc remaining. That's where people's support of it came from. Hamas isn't fundamentally this it's a very broad coalition. You don't see it that way in a lot of English language press. But at this point, it is a broad coalition of everyone who is still committed to that idea of violence. Which, by the way, why are Palestinians, like, Palestinians are the people who initiated the violence. And it's not up to us whether or not to continue using it. The Israeli state perpetrates violence, violates international law on a regular basis in many respects, and refuses to acknowledge this and refuses to quit its own use of violence. So why should the Palestinians lay down arms at all? They have the right to resist under international law. They have the right to resist a foreign occupation.
All right, thank you, Lena. We're gonna throw it to Haz and then Eris, and then Spectre. I see you. You're welcome as well. All right, Haz, go ahead.
I'm detecting a great deal of confusion on Spectre's part about the actual substance of the argument at hand. No one's actually interested in his personal opinion about the supposed viability or unviability of Hamas. Actually, that was a decision down to the Palestinian people themselves within Gaza, who actually elected Hamas. I'm sure Spectre envisions himself as the emperor of the globe, where his personal opinions will exercise
you're pulling an Eris here.
Some kind of impact on how people are supposed to live and who's supposed to rule over them. But the fact of the matter is that that's just not the case. We have a current rules-based framework for the way in which countries and nations will establish the extent of their relations and common observance of rules with regard to one another. And the questions which is open, which stands, is this: how are you going to replace that? How are you going to establish some kind of global police force, which is going to be the organ of your personal views about who you prefer or who you consider as viable or who you consider quote unquote yikesy or woke? That's the question here, and it seems Spectre hasn't actually answered it.
Spectre, would you like to respond, answer it, since you were directly added, and then we're gonna go to Eris.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be emperor of the globe and like say that we're gonna take the military and enforce our will in every like sovereign state on the planet. I'm simply saying that like critical support for organizations like Hamas, the CPC, the DPRK, they get the left fucking nowhere except like, you know, in like fucking fail compilations where we look like absolute morons. And as far as I can tell, like the online left has basically become nothing but like a bludgeoning stick for the right and centrists to beat people with politics to the left of liberalism with, because they look stupid when they do this shit.
Haz, you're welcome directly to respond, and then we're going to go to Eris.
Sure, yes. I also think you're a little bit confused about the topic and subject matter at hand, because the question is revolving around critical or otherwise support for groups resisting American imperialism. It isn't actually about your personal problems with the
three groups that I mentioned were directly
shut up, don't interrupt me. Shut up, don't interrupt me. I didn't interrupt you. Anyway, the question revolves not around the strategy for what looks best for the left in America. We can talk about that, but it seems like that's a completely different topic.
All right, we're going to go to Eris, and then as right now we have Eris, Spectre, back to Haz, and then Destiny. So, Eris, go ahead.
Hey, can you guys hear me all right?
Yep.
Okay. So the issue with Hamas, right? And when we're judging these parties, it's important that we don't just say violence is violence, right? Because there are nuances within violence, and there's a reason why we have international law and how we guard violence. You know, like there's chemical weapons are going to be very different than, say, like normal weaponry, etc., right? Those nuances are really, really important. Those nuances are really important when it comes to judging how Israel perpetuates its violence as well, right? For example, when they used chemical weapons during the 2008 Gaza war, right? So it's important for us to care about those nuances. Anyways, so the issue with Hamas is actually not that it's violent, right? I'm sure that's what Israel is really annoyed by, right? Like that's probably how they often argue it, but it's not really that. The issue, the moral issue, and I think the moral issue that you can really argue with them is not that they're violent, right? I totally understand the need to, you know, physically or to physically resist, right, what you regard as like an occupation and all of that kind of stuff, right? That's not the problem. It's how they're engaging in that violence, right? And this is what distinguishes Hamas from, say, other groups that support Palestinians. One of the main issues with Hamas is that Hamas specifically targets civilians. So I can just take this argument that if we're saying, okay, let's not tell. So Palestinians did not start this, right? I mean, that totally depends. Like, I agree with this, but you can argue anyone started. I mean, you can. I would say that the British started this, right, more than anyone. So, to me, it makes no sense to just say, oh, well, they started, so they can do whatever they want, right? That's not how we judge things. We're not children here. So, I could start and use that argument to say, all right, and just to preface this, I don't believe in this shit because it sounds crazy. Right. But Jewish people are historically oppressed. They did not start violence against them by non-Jewish people. And they are battling a group of people who are in their own charter, okay, are trying to genocide them and regularly target their civilians, women, and children, right, including Palestinians themselves. So rather than military reps. And so who are we as mostly non-Jewish people on this panel to tell these Jewish people how to defend themselves, right? We can all acknowledge how dumb of an argument that is because we deserve to be able to be critical of Israel's actions against the Palestinians.
It's lagging, so she's still talking.
What? Sorry? Can you hear me?
Yeah,
That's what's happening.
I think there might be a slight delay in your speaking, but all right. So Lena had a quick response.
Did you hear the whole sentence?
Wait till after they finish their. Most of it. So just wait till after they finish, and then just a quick response while I'm throwing it to the next person, so you can get your in. So Lena, go ahead, and then we're gonna go to Haz, to Spectre, to Destiny, and then back to Lena. So Lena, go ahead.
Two things. One, Hamas's missiles. You said that they were targeted.
I didn't say their missiles were targeted.
With the Qassam rockets, you said that they were targeted at.
No, civilians. I didn't say the missiles were targeted. I say Hamas regularly targets civilians.
Okay.
Those are two different things, right?
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. Second thing is, my family is from East Jerusalem, and I think I have a great deal of say in what Israel does. But that's all.
All right, thank you.
Can I respond to that?
Briefly respond before we.
Okay.
Yeah, please respond.
I agree. I do think you have every right. I think you have every right to respond to Israel's actions against you, like 100%. But I think in general, right, everyone here who has the ability to be rational has the ability to be critical about people's morality and all of this. We have the ability to also criticize various powers, whether it's a tiny little resistance group or a large terrorist group or a large army, to criticize their actions, which and how they go about that. So regardless of, who we are as individuals.
Quick response?
Lena, feel free to respond, then we're going to throw it to Haz.
All right. Okay, but you recognize that what's up on the media, what's up in the popular discourse, like outside of our little Twitter bubble, what's the popular opinion is that Hamas is wrong, is criticism of Hamas. So if you're saying, oh, we should be fair and balanced, sure, but you can't think about it in a vacuum. There's a larger ecosystem at work, and you have to consider that. You have to factor that in.
All right. Thank you, Lena. We're going to throw it to Haz, then Spectre, then Destiny, then Lena, and then Charlotte. Haz, go ahead, buddy.
It is, of course, unfortunate that civilians are being targeted. It's definitely a bad thing. It's nothing to be celebrating. I certainly wouldn't celebrate it. But what we're talking about is a state of war. And in this case, it's a state of war that, from my perspective, clearly casts light upon Israel as the aggressor in. So, of course, it's always unfortunate when civilians are involved in war. But I don't see how we're in a position to reserve judgment over the people of Gaza, who are starting from a place of being victimized by a state that has no regard or respect for the consensus of the international community and the precedents of international law. So it's not that I support the actions or don't support them. I don't recognize an ability for outside observers to reserve judgment whatsoever.
All right. Thank you, Haz. We're going to throw it to Spectre, then Destiny. So Spectre, go ahead.
Right. So I just had a correction from earlier. I believe that Haz said that the Palestinian people voted Hamas into power. That is not the case. They took power via military force in 2007. There was a struggle between them and Fatah. Go ahead, Lena. I think you have a correction.
No, there was an election in 2006 in which Hamas won the majority of seats in.
Yeah, but then both parties are accusing each other of a coup d'etat. So, like, we're taking Hamas's word for it, or?
No, we're taking the word of the election officials, and then Fatah and Hamas had a war over it because Hamas wasn't expected to win, and they won.
Okay, maybe I'm misreading this and trying to get through it too quickly. I don't know. Regardless, I mean, what argument do? So, what do we think is going to happen or come good of critically supporting Hamas? And also, what is the argument that they have? Because I believe that you said that like the Israeli state is an illegal occupation. Basically, is that your position? Because I know that that's Hamas's still.
My position, I think I've been trying to make it pretty clear.
No, I was asking Lena actually.
Oh, okay.
Oh, really? Yes, Israel is engaging in an illegal occupation of the West Bank and an illegal blockade of the Gaza Strip.
So, do you think that Israel just needs to be like? Is that the solution here? Israel needs to go. Like Israel can't.
Are you asking what my solution to the conflict as a whole is?
I know that
the
that's Hamas's solution, so I'm asking if that's what you think. Like, I'm trying to figure out.
I support a singular, secular state for all peoples in the area between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean Sea.
I mean, of the two groups, which one is like closer to being a like secular democracy right now? I'd say that Israel is a lot further along than anybody, as far as the Palestinian parties are concerned.
I note how I said for all peoples, and Israel is absolutely nowhere near that, considering that Palestinians are effectively second-class citizens within Israel.
Right. Thank you, Lena. We're going to throw it to Destiny, and then back to Lena for a longer statement if you want, and then to Charlotte. So, Destiny, go ahead.
I had something to respond to from some of the earlier conversations, but I don't know how relevant it is now. I will say that I think we have to be careful because I think right now we're talking, the topic is supposed to be like the general principle of how do we decide when or when not to support U.S. imperialistic action or foreign intervention, especially through military means. I think that that's a little bit different than like the exact specificities of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. I don't know if that influences our broader arguments or if we're just going to get bogged down arguing about this specific conflict. Yeah.
So it was specifically about like I referenced different organizations because I assumed people on this panel wanted to talk about like say specifics because this panel was originally planned back at the height of the tensions between Israel and Palestine, like a couple weeks ago. So we're kind of like filtering back in through that later. So we can obviously talk about other stuff as well. But if people want to like specifically discuss Israel-Palestine stuff, that's totally fine for the purposes of this panel right now. So is there anything else you want to say, or can we throw it back to Lena?
No, go for it, Lena.
All right.
Actually, no. I was going to say something earlier, but it's already been addressed, so skip me, please.
All right. Charlotte.
Yeah, I just wanted to make all I wanted to say was a quick correction on a couple of things. So one, I know what Spectre is referring to, and I used to be of the same opinion that like the 1988 charter it's pretty bad, right? It's like Mein Kampf level, right? It's really fucking bad, right? But right, even though Hamas is still an Islamist organization and is fundamentally like far right, and in their beliefs and in their prescriptions for the world, in 2012, they do have a new charter and they do like have a different set of prescriptions. And inside of it, whether you want to believe them is a different conversation, right? And I am leaning towards it's probably just a PR move. But the thing is, you still have to acknowledge that they did make that statement and they have like stated those goals, right? So that's still a part of like the conversation. And also, Hamas does have guided missiles. They have Cornets, and they have used them against civilians. And the only reason they use Qassam rockets is because they lack the means to use anything else. If Hamas had access, and they are starting to now because of other countries like I think like Russia helping them, they have access to more modern weaponry. The only reason they use Qassam rockets is because they don't have access to anything else. They would use other weapons if they had them, and they are starting to get those, and they have used them against children.
Thank you, Charlotte. Spectre, you were directly added. You're welcome to respond.
Yeah, no, I'm aware that they took that out of the charter. I agree with your assertion that it was a PR move and that they're still anti-Semitic as all hell. Good instincts there. But I would add that my issue isn't really the charter as much as back in, I think it was 2017, when they were also cutting ties with the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, I would assume for PR purposes. And said that they would consider the establishment of a sovereign Palestine state on the 67 borders. They even added in the clause that the establishment of Israel is still considered entirely illegal by our movement. Now, I don't think that what Hamas is saying is that they want a democratic, secular state for all people when they call Israel legal. I think that they're saying that they would like Israel wiped off of the map of the Middle East.
So, if I can just quickly respond to that, if that's okay. Do you acknowledge that a group can believe that a state or an organization is illegitimate without wanting to genocide them?
Yes, but if right before that you had stuff that looked like it was pulled directly out of Mein Kampf from your charter, and then you back off to that, I'm a little bit suspicious about what your intentions actually are with that verbiage.
So like, obviously, yes, you can be suspicious, right? But like, if they were making some effort, since it's been like 40, 30 years, right, since that charter, right? And there is an effort, like both culturally and politically in the Gaza Strip to change their beliefs, right? They can still be anti-Semitic, right? Like have you seen the ADL surveys of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank? They're really anti-Semitic, like as in like JQ level, right? But that's different from stating that they literally want to kill all Israelis and make them all suffer and die, right? Like they're at some point, when do you start believing them if they change their positions? Do you just like stop, never believe them?
Please let me
to
talk.
Infinity?
I'm actually dying.
All right. Well, all right, Eris.
I just finished. I'm good.
All right, Eris, you're welcome to do a quick response.
Okay. So first of all of this is just total bullshit, right? So Hamas has, first of all, they uploaded an addition to their original charter, right? So some people are trying to use words like they're playing with semantic words by like semantic debates by saying, oh, it's a new charter, right? Implying that it replaces the old charter. No, it doesn't. It just adds to the new charter, and it adds to the old charter. And this charter is literally just for public consumption. In 2017, literally the leaders of Hamas literally said, okay, when there were some reformers within Hamas who wanted it to replace the charter, but it got completely outvoted within Hamas, and Hamas literally said, okay, that their so-called new charter was just the public charter, and it was not replacing the original one, and the organization still officially went by that original charter. So they are still genocidal by their very, very definition. Not only are they genocidal by their definition, right, but they are also Palestinians too. They only like specific types of Palestinians, right? Like Sunni Palestinians who go along that specific form of Islamic line that they subscribe to. So this is why they regularly discriminate against basically anyone who doesn't fall into that, including like Shiite Muslims, Christians, etc. So acting as if they've changed their position and they've reformed. No, you know who has changed their position? Fatah. Right? And I know they've got tons of problems. I am not denying that. But like, if we want to talk about a group that's went from being, engaging in terrorist activities to completely changing their positions, then let's talk about Fatah, because that's the only accurate description there. It does not apply to Hamas whatsoever.
Right.
Can I say one sentence? It's literally one sentence.
Of course, yeah, of course. Go ahead.
We've had this conversation before. So I'm pro Fatah, right? I was only talking about Hamas in this context with Spectre in relation to perhaps after 30 years, they don't hold exactly the same positions that they did back then, right? Because they have a new body of people in charge, right?
No, but they don't.
Culture changes, right? And political goals change based on the Okay.
They don't. Those people are getting outvoted. There are reformers within the movement, but they're getting outvoted.
I even said to Spectre.
Everybody. Okay, so Eris, when Charlotte's responding, please let her finish. You're welcome to respond immediately afterwards. All right? That's totally fine. But please let them just finish their sentences. So
I'm sorry, I'm used to Prime's panels. So
I even said to Spectre, I lean pretty heavily on it was probably a PR move, right? But I added on top of that, if we say this move specifically in 2017, whatever, whenever it was, right? If that's a PR move, right? But if they continue to like reform their image, reform their charter, reform their prescriptions, reform their like beliefs, right? At what point do you start believing them? Like, is there any point where you start believing them?
I mean, if
Eris,
Hamas actually
you're welcome to
starts,
respond.
if Hamas like actually starts trying to reform itself, right? Trust me, I will be the first person to be like, yeah, come, legitimize yourself by all means. Holy God, Palestinians need someone better than Fatah, right? That's a legitimized like source, but that's not what they're doing. So I actually think it's really dangerous to be giving like this impression that they've somehow changed their opinion or evolved since the 1980s or something like that, right? That's actually not happened. And I mean, people within Hamas will actually tell you the exact same thing. Like reformers within Hamas have tried, like the younger generation, so-called, have tried. It's not possible, right? Because there are still, there's still a huge movement of younger Hamas supporters and people within Hamas that support that old line. So, and in fact, they actually have gone even more extreme after the most recent conflict because they feel like they were really effective. So it's not. So we're giving like a total wrong impression. We're trying to imply that they've kind of changed, right? If they start changing, then I'll probably be the first to believe them if they actually start changing, right? Because I have a bias towards like roses and sunshine, but that's just not what's going on. Like they're not actually changing. I'm listening to them. I'm believing them.
I don't want to respond with anything. I just want. Do you mind posting in chat somewhere a citation for the private meeting stuff?
All right, Eris, if you could do that. Right now, the list is Lena and then Haz. Lena, go ahead. Haz, go ahead. If someone else wants to get in this, please raise your hand, or Eris, make your animation. So, Lena, go ahead.
I would like to correct a misconception. The idea is that critical support, and even then, like, I'm not going to explicitly state whether I do or not, but regardless, critical support does not mean I want these people to be in charge or you want these people to be in charge. Critical support is they are the entity which needs it. Fundamentally, at the end of the day, Hamas is the sole organization of Palestinian resistance right now. Fatah isn't. Fatah suppresses protests of Palestinians against the Israeli state. Fatah does security for the Israeli state, helps the Israeli state throw children in prison via their own police force, their own militarized police force, and sort of just, for the most part, submits to this occupation. And for the purpose of enrichment, self-enrichment. This is what happened with Arafat. This is what happened with Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas. So fundamentally, it's not a choice. For Palestinians, there isn't a choice. In a perfect world, I'd have a secular socialist party in charge. In a perfect world, that'd be what happened. That's who I would support uncritically. Or not uncritically, critically. But there's no choice. There's no other entity.
All right. Thank you, Lena. I'd just like to remind everybody, this is getting like specifically in the weeds. If you can elaborate slightly when, like, say you like use a name or use a term, just so people who are watching can follow along a little bit better, myself included, that would be fantastic and exceptional. So if it means I have to give you like an extra couple seconds so you're able to do that, that's totally fine. Just remember that some people are not as educated on this as anyone on this panel. So so please do that in the future. All right. So right now we have Haz, and then we'll throw it to Spectre. So Haz, go ahead, buddy.
Yes, the projection of European history and the crimes of Europe and European anti-Semitism and phenomena like Nazism upon the Palestinian peoples or the general peoples of the Middle East is complete opportunism and completely unjustified opportunism. First and foremost, whatever excessive rhetoric on the part of the Palestinians or Hamas or others, it is within the context of a war between two peoples. In contrast, European anti-Semitism emerged in the context of a minority of the population in Europe, the Jews, who were oppressed and targeted with exterminationist designs, for example, by the Nazis. So it's a completely different context. Furthermore, I find it really rich to project European anti-Semitism in politics and hold Palestinians to that standard, when it is the powers of European imperialism who were ultimately responsible and made possible the current conflict in the Middle East and between the Jews and Palestinians, or Israelis and Palestinians. So it's a complete form of opportunism. The fact that you find, and again, no one has responded to this singular point. The fact that Spectre finds Hamas to be yikesy, he has not demonstrated why that is of any relevance. Why do your personal views have any bearing on the right of the Palestinian people to self-determination? You're not Palestinian. You don't know anything about Palestinians. You don't live in Palestine, and you have nothing to do with Palestinians. So who cares what you think about it?
Who cares what you think about it, then? I mean,
I'm defending the Palestinians' right to self-determination. So I'm not imposing my specific arbitrary subjective view on the Palestinians. You are. That's the difference, Spectre. When you want to interrupt me, at least come with a good point. You're doing terrible,
we're
dude.
done talking.
Haz, are you finished? Because I'm gonna throw it to Spectre, and then Eris, and then Destiny. All right, thank you, Haz. All right, Spectre, you're welcome to respond. And then, like I said, the list is as it is. So, Spectre, go ahead.
Right. So if anti-Semitic extremist groups in the Middle East didn't want to get compared to the anti-Semitism of the European powers, they shouldn't have copy and pasted it into their fucking charter. This is from the 1988 Charter of Hamas. With their money, they took control of the world media, news agencies, the press, publishing houses, broadcasting stations, and others. With their money, they stirred revolutions in various parts of the world with the purpose of achieving their interest and reaping the fruit therein. They were behind the French Revolution, the Communist Revolution, and most of the revolutions we heard and hear about here and there. With their money, they formed secret societies such as the Freemasons, Rotary Clubs, the Lions, and others in different parts of the world for the purpose of sabotaging societies and achieving Zionist interest. With their money, they were able to control imperialistic countries and instigate them to colonize many countries in order to enable them to exploit their resources and spread corruption there. So, if they don't want to get painted as anti-Semitic in the same way that, you know, the fucking Nazis were, they shouldn't be copying Mein Kampf and putting it in their fucking charter. Also, Lena, I understand that the people of Palestine have no other group to support by Hamas, but that is by Hamas's design. They have kneecapped every other party, including Fatah, who they have killed many officials of, and every time that they launch rockets over that fucking wall, they know the Iron Dome is going to ensure that they don't land. They do it so that rockets will be launched back, more people will be radicalized, and conditions will deteriorate so that they once again have no choice but to support Hamas because of the very little infrastructure that they're actually able to fucking provide.
All right, Haz and Lena, you both were added there, so you're both welcome to respond briefly before we throw it to Eris and then Destiny. So whichever one you want to go first.
Excellent. I just want to congratulate Spectre on failing to address the point whatsoever. We're all aware that Hamas repeats anti-Semitic talking points and copies the protocols of Elders of Zion, all that kind of stuff. But just because they do that doesn't mean it's in essence the same thing. Obviously, those views are deplorable. From my perspective, they're deplorable views. But they are within the context of a war between two peoples, not of a oppressor population targeting Jews for being Jews with exterminationist rhetoric. Shut up. Don't interrupt me, boy. Second of all,
please be polite, but like Spectre, please don't interrupt Haz when he's talking. All right, both of you are starting to get into it. Please stop. All right, if I have to mute the other one while the one of you is talking, I'll do that. But like, please don't make me do that. So Haz, keep going, buddy.
You're making it seem like this is just a matter of ideology. Now, from an abstract ideological perspective, oftentimes Hamas does appear indistinguishable from European anti-Semites, but it's the context that makes it different. Obviously, I don't condone those views, but I can also recognize that the meaning they have within the region is different than they have in Europe. In the region, it's a form of impassioned hatred and complete attack, ideological opposition to their enemy that they're fighting within the region. Now, if you look at the history of conflicts between any two nations in the developing world, you're going to see there's a huge degree of impassioned, dehumanizing rhetoric and all this kind of stuff. But it is not, in essence, it doesn't make them the same as Nazis. Just because they abstractly to you sound like Nazis, a person who has complete ignorance about the situation in the region doesn't mean they're the same thing. That's what I was trying to say.
All right. Thank you, Haz. We're going to throw it to Lena, then Spectre. You can respond to both of them, and then Eris, and then Destiny. All right.
I nearly completely disagree with most of Hamas's social and political views. I'm not an Islamist. I deplore anti-Semitism. But your position, your statement, Spectre, that Hamas, that Palestinians are sacrificing their own people, their own children, for the sake of sympathy, is extremely offensive and very reflective of a common prevailing attitude among many Westerners that Arabs in general are willing to sacrifice other people, are willing to sacrifice members of their nation, their people, for the sake of looking good or appealing to others. It's a view that paints us as barbaric savages. It was expressed in Iraq, it was expressed in many other places, and it's just untrue. There's no evidence backing up that claim.
All right. Spectre, you're welcome to respond to both of them. 2 minutes on the clock, then Eris, and then into Destiny. So go ahead, Spectre.
Yeah, I think that Hamas's treatment of the Shiite Muslim population is evidence enough that they don't really care too much about the population. They're ideologically driven. I do not understand how accusing Jews of being behind a global banking conspiracy, multiple revolutions, and several secret societies is somehow better contextualized by a conflict between two groups of people. You'll have to explain that to me at some point, because I'm just no, go ahead.
Sure, I'll explain it right now. There is no inherent animosity that the Palestinian or Arab peoples have towards Jews, and there isn't really a history in thousands of years. There hasn't really been a history of anything remotely comparable to European anti-Semitism. The reason Hamas goes to great lengths to villainize Jews as a whole, in many cases, is because Israelis are mostly Jewish. So it's the context of a war between two peoples. It's not the same as European anti-Semitism, when the context was a specific pathology of persecution and dehumanization of a minority of the population. So it's completely different. Hamas is digging up the archives, the dirty archives of European anti-Semitism, and other groups as well, like the Protocols of Zion, because they're using it as ammunition to villainize their enemy in a conflict of war. This doesn't in essence. Shut up, boy. This doesn't in essence.
You're gish galloping in a response.
All right. So Haz, take like 30 seconds. Finish your point. Spectre, you have like a minute and a half left on your clock. You'll finish yours, and then we're going to Eris and Destiny, who've been waiting very patiently. So
yeah. If you analyze the structure and pathology of European anti-Semitism, it's a great deal more than what we're seeing with Hamas. Hamas is villainizing an enemy it's engaged in war against in the form of villainizing Jews as a whole. A horrible thing, obviously, from my perspective. But the context doesn't allow for a comparison to European anti-Semitism whatsoever. That was the point I was trying to make. And by quoting Hamas making use of the Protocols of Zion or other anti-Semitic materials doesn't actually respond to my point. So I'd love for you to actually respond to my point this time.
All right, Spectre, please respond.
What is your point that you feel that I have not responded to?
The point that you haven't responded to is that the context of the conflict in the region makes the use of anti-Semitic materials and views completely different in context than where they originated from, which was in Europe.
So due to the fact that it's Palestinians doing the global banking conspiracy, JQ, I'm supposed to contextualize that differently and feel better about it? Like, what are you saying?
It does serve a different context and a different meaning. I don't agree with it.
Just to make sure that I understand here, you're saying that the whole like Protocols of the Elders of Zion, it's justifiable to use it if it's villainizing the people of Israel.
Okay, I'd like you to roll back the tape.
Like then it's justified.
Roll back the tape and see where I said it was justified, my good friend. I didn't say it was justified.
Then why does it matter if we contextualize it differently?
Shut up. I didn't even say. I got this, Hans. I got it. I didn't even
I don't care. I need you to stop for a second, all right? All right, I want both of you. I'll give both of you fucking 3 minutes on the clock. Let's just go to Eris and then Destiny. I want you both to think about what you're going to say, and I will mute the other one while you're speaking so you can adequately respond to each other's points. We're going to go to Eris first, and then Destiny, and then Haz, and then Spectre. So, Eris, go ahead.
Okay. First of all, right, Lena, what you were right about the stereotypes about Arabs is 100% correct, and I think that is gross, and it's a complete Western lie. And it's something that I talk a lot about on my stream and where that stereotype comes from and who's perpetuating all that stuff. And it is often perpetuated by the IDF, particularly, like this idea that, oh, like the Arabs like don't value their own children, kind of thing. Golda Meir made some really nasty quotes about that too. So yeah, I agree with you. Just in general, right, is that I actually think in some ways you guys are talking past each other, both Infrared and Inspector, because Infrared, I agree with you, the context is different, right? Is Middle Eastern anti-Semitism and Palestinian-style anti-Semitism or like Hamas-style anti-Semitism, is it different? Yeah, of course, and the context is, it does matter, right? So like I'm gonna put them maybe like not at Nazi level, but maybe like a few, you know, when people perpetuate it, I'm gonna put them like a few slides like, you know, above it on the moral scale in my head. But at the same time, it doesn't like, and the idea that anti-Semitism only exists because of Israel is actually, I know that, trust me, Hans, I know you're not an anti-Semitic, so I just want to preface, I'm not calling you that, but it is a narrative that is furthered to perpetuate kind of like this anti-Semitic idea. That Jews are actually like anything that bad. Whenever people hate Jews, it's because Jews are actually making actions. It's like a victim blaming tactic. That Jews are, you know, engaging in actions that make them deserve, or at least like they should understand where it comes from, right? So, and it's not true, because while European anti-Semitism, oh, come on, I barely got to talk. Okay. While European anti-Semitism, you know, is certainly its own brand, right? That entire brand of anti-Semitism has been transferred to the Middle East right now, and it was transferred by the Soviets, right? But that doesn't mean that that didn't exist before Israel, right? So Hamas, literally the quotes that it makes, the quotes that it does in like in its original charter, that it still uses to this day, right? The idea that like there's a Jew behind you, you still need to kill them. I forget the exact quote. Like there's tons of quotes like this. Those come from the Quran, right? So there's like Middle Eastern anti-Semitism has always been a thing. And yeah, it wasn't at the level of what was in Europe, but it was still pretty fucking bad. It was still at the level of like, you know, I'm going to be anachronistic for a second, but like, you know, like apartheid second-class citizens, you know, they were treated pretty terribly, right? So that's also like this total myth that's kind of being spread, that really gets under my skin as someone that studies Middle Eastern history, that, you know, Jews were just treated totally great there. Yeah, they weren't being burnt alive, right? And they weren't being sent to gas chambers, but that's not the standard I like to have when I'm judging how people are trusted. And additionally, right,
Eris, it's been 3 minutes. Please finish.
One more line, right? Is that Palestinians did there are portions of Palestinians that did purposely court European style anti-Semitism. The Grand Mufti of Jerusalem literally met regularly with Hitler, okay, organizing how they were going to continue to perpetuate a Holocaust in the Middle East once the Nazis got down there. It only got called off because they lost the war, right? So like this idea that's totally separate is just not true. That's it.
Quick
Sorry.
response.
Lena, welcome to respond quickly, and then we're gonna throw it to Destiny.
The Grand Mufti is not like some elected official leader, whatever. He was appointed by the Hashemites, by the Hashemite dynasty when they briefly held control. I think that's it. At least I'm not quite sure, but he wasn't elected. Is the main point?
Yeah.
Here.
Yeah, you're right.
He wasn't a representative in any sense. He was just a dude.
All right.
I disagree with the representative part, but that's another debate.
All right, thank you, Lena. Thank you, Eris. All right, Destiny. Sorry you've been like silence for so long. You got 3 minutes on the clock, same as Eris. Take it away.
Yeah, sorry. I just want to see if I can sort out what's going on here between Spectre and Hans or Haz. So if I can understand what Haz is saying, I think and I'm going to ask you, correct me if I'm wrong. It sounds like, Haz, what you're saying is that the anti-Semitism that existed in Europe was different because it was like an oppressive majority population oppressing a minority population of the same country. But when it comes to the Palestinians, that's different. That's a conflict between two separate countries, and we ought to support their rights to self-determination to figure out how they ought to resolve these conflicts. If one side chooses or opts to violence, then that's part of their right as a country to have that self-determination. Is that like the distinction you're drawing there? I'm asking Haz.
The question, first of all, there's a lot of difficulties here because, as we know, Hamas is classified as a terrorist organization under U.S. law. But what I will say is that I don't think I have to support anyone. I think the burden lies upon people who want to take steps to support Israel or specifically go out of their way to oppose Hamas in some specific way.
Okay, yeah. So then sure. So I understand. So broadly speaking, then, as general rules of thumb, you would support the right of both of these countries to act in the ways that they feel is best for their population. If somebody wants to intervene, then they would need a good reason to do so.
No, I don't know what you're trying to say.
Well, I don't understand why, because you keep using this phrase, the Palestinians have a right to self-determination.
Yes.
And it seemed like that was being used, I don't want to say in defense of Hamas bombing civilians, but more as a justification for like, this is something that they have a right to do if they deem it.
Israel has transgressed the precedent of international law. That's my position.
So your position then for interventions relating to Palestine and Israel, there's an appeal to international law there then every time for how that ought to be resolved? Or
there is some kind of common international framework in which nations abide by common rules that they seek to respect.
Hamas's very existence is against international law.
So my next question is obviously going to be, let's say that the framework was updated in such a way, because obviously the U.S. sits at kind of the head of a lot of these discussions for how this framework works. Is it not possible that there's a world where Israel essentially has the right to delete the entire Gaza Strip from existence, to have all Israeli citizens there, where they move all the Palestinians out of East Jerusalem and they move in all Israeli citizens there? If the international framework were updated such that that was an internationally legally recognized move by them, would you still support that, or would there be some other values?
According to the post-war framework, for the U.S. to be able to drastically change international law to such a degree, it would in effect be completely circumventing it and abolishing it. There's a reason why international law is as balanced as it is because there are other things it could be without the U.S. in effect doing maybe like what Hitler did in Germany, just taking power, completely suspending all laws.
Well, not necessarily that, but like, let's say, for instance, let's say hypothetically. Oh my God, am I on my time?
Keep going. This is like a
okay. Okay,
yeah.
I'm almost done. Okay, let's say that hypothetically you get a more right-leaning president to sit at the head of the United States, like Trump, and let's say that they start making moves to recognize that Israel's actions are actually okay, so like moving the embassy to Jerusalem, and let's say that other countries begin to kind of sort of follow suit in that, and eventually like the international community just comes around to recognizing, for whatever reason, the Israeli claims are to some of the Palestinian territory. Like, does your mind, I guess what I'm ultimately pushing at is like, right now we're making appeals to international treaties because it seems that no other countries right now recognize Israel's right to, I guess, bully Palestinians around or embargo the Gaza Strip or to push them further east in the West Bank. But if that international like consensus were to change, I personally, I don't believe that your opinion would change with that. I feel like you'd appeal to something else at the end of the day. But I could be wrong on that.
One of the reasons I respect the legitimacy of international law is because it reflects not even so much fairly, but it more or less is some kind of common framework that reflects the actual populations of the world and the actual bilateral, multilateral relations established between the peoples of the world. The Middle East is a region of vital significance. The relations between China and Iran and Russia and so on and so on. These are we're talking about populations of hundreds of millions of people. And then in the case of China and Russia, billions, So I don't believe this. I think this is more a philosophical debate about where does the legitimacy of law come from? Should laws be respected just because it's the law? No, I don't think that, but I do think the laws that we do have reflect some kind of underlying material reality.
I guess my final
yeah, Destiny, finish your final point there, and then you said you might have. Did you have any questions for Spectre, or do you just want to finish your point for Haz?
It was just kind of figure out what I was saying. Just my final point on that is that, like, one of the criticisms that I see people give a lot to people that talk about international law is people will say, well, international law is written so much by the big players that it's not really fair to appeal to that it doesn't actually represent what most of the people in the world would want because of the disproportionate amount of power given to certain countries. So, for instance, the fact that everybody on the Security Council can get an instant veto vote over certain types of actions, or the idea that, like, even some of the definitions that we have will slightly change based on who's being represented at the UN. So regardless, I don't want to open up a whole argument, but, like, so some people would argue that, like, the Holodomor not being recognized as a genocide was part of the UN's attempt to, like, kind of appease the Soviet Union because they didn't want to start that conflict, or whether or not we enter certain conflicts, a single veto vote on the Security Council can downvote that. So some people would say international law isn't really reflective of what everybody wants. It's way too tipped towards, like, larger players that can influence it. But yeah,
yeah,
it's not really argument.
I'm done. Okay, I'm done. Haz, finish like a brief point, because then, like, you still have your 3 minutes. So Haz, finish like a quick response to Destiny, and then we're gonna give Spectre 3 minutes, and then Haz, you get 3 minutes uninterrupted.
Yeah,
so please
like
just make
the laws of any given country, including the laws of the United States. I disagree with America's laws, and I also countries have to go off of to know what the rules are as they're in place. Should a discussion be opened up, in my opinion, about reforming international law to reflect better the interests of the smaller countries collectively? Sure, but this has to be done in a legal way, is my point. Just like how in America, I may oppose the laws, but this doesn't mean I'm going to start doing illegal things.
All right, thank you, Haz. We're gonna go to Spectre for 3 minutes, then Haz for 3 minutes. Everybody, we have 40 minutes left on this topic. Trying to keep this panel under 3 hours. People seem to be doing a lot in this conversation, so we're gonna keep going a bit longer than normal. We're gonna keep the last one to say probably about an hour 20. So Spectre, 3 minutes on the clock, uninterrupted. Haz, please go ahead.
Right. I don't think I'm gonna need 3 minutes here. Yeah, if the whole point of our back and forth earlier was that anti-Semitism in the Middle East is different than anti-Semitism in Europe in some ways, fine. It's just it felt really loaded the way that you were accusing me of trying to force some kind of European label onto them. But whatever, cool. I don't think that either groups that practice either kind of anti-Semitism are worthy of critical support. I think that should be a deal breaker. I guess that was my contention. It sounds like you might agree with me there, so that's fine. And yeah, Lena, in regards to the stuff with Arabs not caring about their own people, that wasn't my intention to make the argument that way. If it came across that way, I do apologize. I do think that groups like ISIS probably don't care about the lives of civilians in a lot of countries there, and a lot of times I am suspicious that Hamas might be one of those groups as well. That's really all that I was saying. It's not an Islamophobic thing. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, obviously no one here supports ISIS or Boko Haram. They are not in any way, in my view, at least, opposed. Yeah, okay.
I wouldn't. Yeah, I wouldn't assert that about anybody on this panel. What I was basically just saying is that I was using them as an example. Like, we can understand that, like, ISIS probably doesn't give a fuck about the civilians in a lot of the countries that they're active in. I would argue the same thing for Hamas. It's not an Islamophobic thing. That's all I'm saying.
All right. All right. Thank you, Spectre. All right, Haz. You have 3 minutes uninterrupted. You don't have to use all of it. Go ahead, buddy. And everyone else, the list is empty now. So if you want to start getting in and again, start raising your hands. Like I said, we have about 25 minutes left on the clock now for this before we do our closing statements. Eris, I'll put you on the list.
Thanks.
So despite the fact that I think anti-Semitism is unjustifiable from an ideological perspective, and obviously from a personal perspective, I do not think that whether or not groups hold quote-unquote yikesy views is a decisive starting point to justify or support imperialist aggression against them. I may disagree with them subjectively, but I don't think I have the right to sit in judgment against them from a perspective of some way to objectively affect them and change them in some kind of way. Regarding one of the things Eris pointed out in the history of Jews in the Middle East, it's certainly true that Jews, as far as I'm aware, at no point were equals to Muslims in the history of the Middle East. Jews were relegated to the status of second-class citizens. The difference is so were Christians. All non-Muslims who were recognized, at least, as recognized religions and had a dhimmi, were relegated to second-class citizens. There was no, in the main, there are specific exceptions I want to mention. In the main, there is no specific form of anti-Semitism in the Middle East. There is a kind of, I guess, oppression of Muslims against non-Muslims, but there is no specific targeting or isolating. Jews were able to rise to great positions of fame, prominence, and power in the Middle East, especially compared to Europe at the time. It's a no-brainer. But I know the narrative that Jews were, complete equals is wrong, but it must be recognized that some of the greatest Jewish thinkers of all time flourished within Muslim lands and Middle Eastern lands. Secondly, and then the exceptions I want to point out is I remember specifically there was a case of a Jewish vizier being overthrown by the population. And
1 minute left, buddy, but keep going.
Yeah, that corresponded to some kind of, I guess, seems like maybe a specific anti-Semitism, but I don't know. I think it was just some kind of incitement against a specific population for a different reason. I'm not aware of any major instances of anti-Semitism before European intervention in the Middle East.
All right, thank you, Haz. We're gonna throw it to Eris and then Lena. So Eris, go ahead.
All right. So, first of all, I don't think the argument that like that there were specific Jews that flourished and did incredibly well, it is a good one, right? For example, there were a lot of Jews that were doing incredibly well, literally, the year Hitler got elected. So it like within Nazi Germany. So that doesn't really like carry over, though you are right that Jews were flourishing by comparison, in Middle Eastern countries, particularly in places like Iran. But the question is like, where are those Jews now, right? How many Jews used to live in Iran, in Lebanon, in Jordan, like in Turkey, in Morocco? Like, where are all these Jews now? None of them exist there, right? I think there's like in Iran has the largest Jewish population in the Middle East outside of Israel. And I think their population is definitely in like the few thousands. It's very, very, very tiny. So largely, right, Jews have been ethnically cleansed out of these regions. So it doesn't matter if, there was something that inspired it, right? Or there was something that involved it, right? Like it's still, the result was an ethnic cleansing. And that means that, is Middle Eastern style anti-Semitism is still really, really dangerous and really, really bad. Because Mizrahi Jews who are not white, right, even though they get treated like they're just white Europeans, got treated terribly as a consequence. So I don't think it's fair to just like brush over and act like it's not, it's not really that bad, or that I know you're not saying this, but it definitely feels like, that I'm just kind of being like maybe like a woke scold about Hamas. Like they're just, they're just not politically correct sometimes. Like sometimes they say this, but, but in reality, and the core issues, like they're really just this group of resistance fighters fighting against imperialism. That's not true. And I can use all those arguments to justify Israel's actions. And I don't want to justify Israel's actions, but I could use those arguments, and that's why they're so faulty, right? I could really do the whole thing about how Jews are just like a people that are historically oppressed in the Middle East, right? And that they didn't start the violence, and they just wanted their own country when they were surrounded by all these different Muslim countries. And in their historical and their ancestral land. And when they try to establish just their own land, then boom, all these neighboring Muslim dominant countries like waged war on them. And then they defended themselves. I could use that argument too, right? I think it's a pretty faulty one, but I'm just demonstrating why this argument that like kind of trying to justify Hamas, or trying to downplay like Hamas's anti-Semitism is so faulty.
All right, thank you, Eris. We're gonna throw it to Lena, and then Haz, if you want to respond to that after Lena, you're welcome to as well. Then we're gonna go to Spectre. So, and just reminding everyone, we have 15 minutes left on this topic before we get a closing statement. So, if you want to get in, start raising those hands. All right, so Lena, go ahead.
The ethnic cleansing of Jews from many Middle Eastern countries was not almost certainly, was an atrocity, a very, very regrettable one. But it's not on Palestinians, and the context with regard to Palestinians is different. I'm not speaking for any other nation in the Middle East, but Hamas's anti-Semitism is deplorable. And if there were literally any other choice that wasn't as bad, and was resisting in the same way, they should be supported. But Hamas is that sole organ. And fundamentally, I don't think you can compare Israel and Palestinian struggle like that, especially in the context of Israel was established as a colonial hold. The relations are colonial relations. It's a very one-sided thing. Putting that violence on the same level is just not accurate at all. Even Herzl described it as a colonial project.
All right. Thank you, Lena. We're going to throw it to Haz, and then Spectre, and then Charlotte. Haz, take it away.
Yeah, just briefly. Of course, the crimes, the persecution and expulsion and violence against Jews within those Arab countries is completely unjustifiable. Nothing justifies it. I'm not saying Israel and the conflict with Israel could have possibly justified that. It was a horrible, horrible thing. I think however, there are attitudes now of some kind of critical reflection and remorse. I don't know how popular they are to reflect upon this history. Why were, Mizrahi Jews who were a part of these nations, a part of these countries, so unjustly targeted in this frenzied violence? But I ultimately believe that if you even look at the history of Mizrahi Jews within Israel itself and the conflict there and the level of racism and kind of colonial attitude, I ultimately think that some kind of reconciliation between the peoples of the Middle East has to be had from the perspective of the anti-imperialist popular forces. Now, Iran is not a perfect country, but I am not aware of widespread persecution of the Jewish community in Iran whose religious rights are respected and who are allowed to drink alcohol and so on and so on. So maybe it's not perfect, but it's an example of the fact that opposition to Israel from an anti-imperialist perspective doesn't always equate to oppression of native Jews.
All right. Thank you, Haz. All right, we're going to throw it to Spectre and then Charlotte. Spectre, go ahead.
Right, I'm gonna let somebody else get into the Iran and Jewish people stuff because that's insane to me. So just to make sure, because I'm gonna have an aneurysm, like I'm understanding here. Lena, what you're saying makes sense to me. It's the only group, so I wish that I didn't have to support them. I find the anti-Semitism deplorable, but it's the only group that I feel like has a chance of getting like the Palestinian people where I think they need to be. Correct?
Yes. That is the position.
And I guess that my contention there is I don't think that Hamas has any chance of getting the Palestinian people where they need to be because they're using like brute force and violence, and Israel wins that fight all fucking week. But yeah, go ahead.
Well, fundamentally, it's not an option. The way you're presenting this choice is that if Hamas gives up violence, there won't be violence in reprisal from Israel, but this isn't true. It's not a choice of peace process or Hamas violence versus Israeli violence. It's a question of lay down or take up arms against an entity which is violent by its very structure. That's the choice.
Okay.
Wait, so it's just its very existence is you consider violent, right?
Not its very... Yes, in that it isn't a state founded on the principle of equal rights for all peoples. Especially because of the nation state law. But even before that, it is the case that Israel was founded on the displacement of over 470,000 Palestinians, way more, but that's the number I can remember at least. And those Palestinians still aren't allowed back. And it fundamentally places the rights of Jewish people above the rights of Palestinian people. So yes, by its existence, it is a violent entity. It cannot exist without oppressing Palestinians. Even if it were to let go of the West Bank and the blockade, the Palestinians within Israel and the Palestinians outside of Israel who lived in villages like Lifta, in villages in the over 600 villages that were destroyed during the Nakba, they would never be allowed to return to a homeland, and they would be slowly integrated into the rest of the world, disconnected from their nation and from their people. And that is violent.
Eris,
So
would you like to
refugees not
respond
being
before we
having the
throw-
right to return is automatically violent and justifies any form of violence? Answer?
More so that even in the case that everything but the right to return is resolved, it still doesn't change the fact that Israel is founded on violence and that it is exclusionary toward those Palestinians.
Okay, so then I would actually say that your argument, right, is, yeah, it's against the peace process. And considering Israel has nukes, right, the only option for Palestinian sovereignty and for Palestinians to be free is to engage in a peace process with Israel, right?
What is peace? Like fundamentally, when you say peace,
a two-state solution. The parameters were negotiated between Yasser Arafat, right? Yasser Arafat during the Camp David Accords and during the Oslo Accords. The two-state solution is where Palestinians will have their own sovereignty over the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and Gaza, okay, with a tunnel or a highway or something like that connecting them, where they have their own self-determination, etc., right, and live in peace alongside like Israel. And this way, Jews still have their own right to self-determination in a country where they're the majority, right? Considering they are literally one of the tiniest minorities in the entire world, and they are surrounded by Muslim majorities, countries, which are also all basically ethno-states as well, but no one seems to give a shit about them, strangely. So those two groups living alongside, and that will lead to Palestinians not having to live under occupation. It means that Palestinians will not have to deal with blockades and all of that kind of stuff because they will be, like a proper national country with, their own self-determination, etc. Right? Like this is like a proper organized plan. It probably will lead to eventually, right? It probably will lead eventually. Like I agree with you. I also want eventually a secular state for both groups to live alongside one another. I just think that you need a stepping stone to get there. And Palestinians don't exactly have time to wait for, this utopia that's just not going to get there from one end to the other.
All right, Lena, you're welcome to respond. Then we go to Red Charlotte and then to Haz. If you want to get in before we do closing statements, raise your hand right now. All right, Lena, go ahead.
Fundamentally, that two-state peace process, which you described, may have been possible in 1994 and in 2000, but with the current state of affairs, it is functionally impossible. And even if it were possible, even if we let aside all morals and removed all Jewish people, or not all Jewish people, but all settlers from the West Bank, and we removed and we allowed Palestinians to move back into Palestine, and we determined that a Jewish majority state was absolutely necessary. Even in that instance, the aquifers in the West Bank are saline because they've been way overfarmed. Many of the natural sites in the West Bank have been exploited, have been nearly destroyed. The Dead Sea is currently undergoing a process of destruction, which may be irreversible, to produce cosmetics. So many ancestral olive trees and plantations have been removed, and now a lot of areas are desertifying. What you'd be handing Palestinians is a broken state with no possibility, not no possibility, but with a very, very difficult path to repair. And
do you know what the Palestinians had before Israel existed?
Yeah, it's like Eris, your question's fine, but please let Lena finish. Lena, 30 seconds to finish. Eris, you can do a quick response briefly, then we're gonna throw it to Red Charlotte.
Okay. Fundamentally, and no Israeli government in the modern day is going to accept any sort of security arrangement that isn't Israeli security arrangements for the West Bank. That was Likud position, and the current administration's position is just as drastic. Yes, this might have worked, but this is hypothetical. It's not reflective of reality. Go ahead.
In what reality can you get Israel? How are you going to get Israel to somehow destroy its own existence?
You describe it as a process of destruction, but I think it's more like rebirth. It's decolonization. I don't view,
Actually, decolonization is what Israel's entire existence. That's how they justify their existence, was decolonization from the original Roman.
Actually, no. In their founding, they described it as colonization. As
no, only Herzl did, not like the just because Herzl used colonization, and it was a totally different form of the word colonization than the way we understand it now. It's a complete misunderstanding, right? Like, I just don't understand, like, how you're trying to apply this European lens to the Middle East, to two very historically oppressed groups of people, both Palestinians and Jews. And the lens just does not, it makes no sense. Like, it's just going to take you away from truth. And that makes sense because all your opinions are just steered so far away from the peace process. To me, you're just a complete, like, unproductive member of this conversation, because anything that we could try to engage in or negotiate, like, literally the very existence of a Jewish state, okay, is considered violence to you. So if everything's violence, that means anything's justified against that violent entity. And that just means it's just totally unproductive. Like, there's nowhere we can go, because the truth is Israel's just not going anywhere, no matter what we want to do, right? It's not going anywhere the same way any other problematic country that exists right now, including the countries most of us are on right now, are not going anywhere. They have nukes, it's done, right? We need to go, and for practicality, we need to negotiate on how we can actually make things better and work on incremental change.
If you're talking about, sorry.
No, Lena, you're welcome to respond another 2 minutes, and then we're going to go to Charlotte, then Haz, then Spectre, and then we're going to start closing statements.
If you're talking about practicality, a two-state solution is impractical. There's no way Israel will agree to it at this point. There's absolutely no way to resolve the question of settlements without forced population transfers. There's so much resource depletion that a Palestinian state would be unviable. And even if and fundamentally, no, I'm not applying a white European lens. The way I see it, it's like South Africa. The West Bank isn't an independent state. It's under military occupation, but it's the same as a reservation or a Bantustan. Like, it's the exact same. It is a separate ethnic enclave, or not enclave. It is a separate ethnic region, which is forced to abide by Israeli military law, and which no one recognizes, or only a select number of countries recognize, because it's not its own self-governing entity. It's not truly self-governing. And fundamentally, the way that this all works out is that there is no viable two-state solution. There isn't. So the question is, do we accept coexistence, or do we accept something else? Or does this continue?
Okay, I'd say that there's no viable, like, none of the experts agree with you. Like, it's just totally untrue. The only thing that both parties have actually literally agreed to. So it is the only viable solution. The other solution is literally a one-state Israel apartheid-like system, okay, where basically Palestinians just have to live as second-class citizens. That's the only other option, right, in terms of practicality. So, like, that makes no sense to me.
All right. Thank you, Eris. Thank you, Lena. Charlotte, go ahead.
Okay, so I'm gonna say a bunch of small things and then, like, a main thing, because, like, I've just been waiting so long. So, like, in response to Lena, I think that this like, I don't want to describe it as defeatist, but, like, it sort of sounds defeatist, because this sort of, like, oh, Fatah is like a shell of its former self. It is completely pointless to believe that Fatah can ever take power back and be, like, an effective entity to support and represent the Palestinian people. I just believe this just isn't true. Like, every party and political power has its ups and downs. Like, it's just in a dip, right? Like, because of the things that have happened in the past 20 years. Like, so, like, I think it's still we should, right? It's like imperative that we should push to support the secular leftist Fatah, right? Because they are social democrats and socialists. And then, 2, a bunch of these are to Eris. The whole argument that you brought up, why don't we care about other countries? This is like a classic talking point that people always bring up. We all do. Every single one, every single person in this room is against ethno-states. I hope, right? And the difference is that other countries, most countries have organic ethnic majorities, right? Nobody here is opposed to like if organically it just so happens that there's an ethnic majority. That doesn't.
I don't think
like,
expelling anyone else who doesn't fall into that is organic.
What matter? You know what I mean when I say organic. So please, like, don't do this. So, like, there's a difference between that and a legislatively like prescribed system where they say this is a land for this people and this people only, and these people will be prioritized over everyone else, where half the country wants to expel the non-in group. And then also, there's just so much. Like this whole topic like sort of got off the rails because it was supposed to be about critical support. It's just an Israel-Palestine debate, right? I just wanted to end it. Like, does anyone here disagree that like there is a limit to whether or not you should critically support something based on like the means, based on alternatives that exist, and based on what they would do if they were to replace the dominant power, right? Like, is this disagreeable to anybody?
I think that everybody agrees on that there should be a line. We're just disagreeing on where the line is. Because the line for me, anti-Semitism, I'm not going to support that group as a Jewish man. Haz has said that he's totally fine with it because it's just a yikesy view. So maybe I was being when I described anti-Semitism earlier. That's literally what you said, dude.
And
you said I don't mind supporting these groups just because they have yikesy views. So that was your words.
And like to expand it outside of Israel-Palestine, right? I wanted to talk about earlier about Afghanistan, right? The ANA, right? The ANA, right, has a ton of flaws, right? They turn their eye on bachabazi, right, which is literal boy rape, right? They turn their eye on corruption. They turn their eye on violence. But right, I still think they are worthy of critical support because the alternative, right, is the Taliban, right? And the Taliban would do like that times 20, right? And this applies to literally every situation, right? If Hamas abides by its 88 charter, if we all believe that, which we aren't in agreement about that, if they do, like, they aren't worth supporting if they adhere to the 88 charter, because if they replaced Israel as the dominant power, what they would do is worse than what Israel is doing, right? Is this disagreeable to anybody?
I'm not allowed to respond.
Haz, you want to like Haz? You can say something. Like,
sure. Regarding the two-state solution, even if we were to agree with the two-state, what incentive does Israel have to pursue it? And furthermore, what is Israel? Israel is so politically divided that any party within Israel that's going to push for a two-state solution, I don't think they would have a chance. I think Israel's too divided for that to be possible, and I don't think the Palestinians are going to be able to rely upon the good faith and goodwill of the Israelis when they have no incentive to, and even the people who do feel that they have an incentive to are nowhere near the majority. Now, regarding the European origins of Zionism, I wasn't aware that this was even contested. Zionism was rooted in the modern European thought of the 19th century, and the view was basically that it was inspired by German Romanticism, and the view was that that there was a Jewish question in Europe, quote unquote, and the solution was that Jewish people need to become a nation states just like other European countries. Regarding the view that Fatah is left wing, I think this results from a form of political analysis that rests upon browsing Wikipedia panels. The fact of the matter is that on the ground within the West Bank, no one considers Fatah left wing, quote unquote. They're extremely corrupt, and it's interesting. Everyone wants to talk about Fatah when during the 1980s, yesterday's Hamas was Fatah, right? The Israelis supported Hamas against the PLO in the 1980s. So now all of a sudden everyone wants to support them all over again. Why should anyone even trust that? And regarding the thing about the Taliban, well, obviously I don't personally think the Taliban are preferential to me. But the fact of the matter is that the practice you just mentioned, Baka, Bazar, whatever, was eliminated by the Taliban. And the corruption and arguably the corruption and crimes of the current Afghan government dwarf those of the Taliban. The problem with the Taliban comes from a perspective of human rights, to my knowledge, outside of Afghanistan. Within Afghanistan, it's up to the Afghani people who they want. A foreign propped up, a completely corrupt, pedophilic government, critical support for that. Wow, that's incredible. And now the allegation from Spectre that I said anti-Semitism was fine is a complete fabrication and a complete lie.
That's not what I
Nowhere-
said. You said
Okay, can I
or
just
that I'm fine with it. Well, what do you mean
Everybody-
fine with it? Do you
no.
is
You
it-
said that it's not a deal breaker for you to offer critical support.
No,
and you
no,
called it
it's
just a
not what I
right
said.
review.
But that's not what I said. What I said is that it's not
can-
decisive for me to believe that I should take extraordinary steps to oppose them. You see the difference? I'm not doing
Not like you
anything.
said.
I'm just sitting on my chair. I'm not going to speak out or use my powers to oppose Hamas because of that. I'm not going to support them, but I'm not going to go out of my way to oppose them. There's a difference. You see?
You can go back and
okay,
watch
so, like,
the
I
audio
think this
about
is-
critical support, but okay.
Charlotte, you got 1 minute left to finish whatever you're going to say, because again, like you were very patient waiting. You got 1 minute, then we're going to go 2 minutes on Spectre, and then we're starting closing statements. Anyone else, like, you're raising your hand now? I'm sorry, it's too late. Like, we got to get to the next topic. So, Charlotte,
I just think
1
like
minute, go ahead.
everything you said about Afghanistan is so funny, right? Because actually, the Afghan people absolutely agree with my position wholeheartedly. This is shown in polls. This
Then the
is shown
U.S.
in
can
surveys.
withdraw and there's no
This-
problem.
Nope. The Afghan people do not want NATO to withdraw until there is a full peace deal, and a peace deal has not yet been met. So, this has been shown in polls. And while if you take in a vacuum, the Taliban, right, eliminating Bachabazi is good. That was good, right? In a vacuum. But you omit everything else the Taliban did, like slaughtering like up to 150,000 people. You talk about the Kabul government dwarfing the crimes of the Taliban. This is just literally just ignorance. Like, you just don't know anything about Afghanistan and like the conflict and what has happened since like the 1990s. This is like insane. Like, to
So
believe
if
that the
Afghan
Kabul government is
people are
worse
in
than the
favor,
Taliban.
why do they need the U.S. military to enforce their will? Why can't the Afghan people themselves decide their own outcome?
They are. They literally ask for foreign assistance. What do you mean?
Why do they need that foreign assistance?
Because they don't have the economic and military capability of opposing a insurgency force. What do you mean?
Can you please provide a citation that the majority of Afghan people want a continued NATO presence?
Yeah, here.
Charlotte, thank you. You both can continue speaking about this during your uninterrupted closing statements. Spectre, you have 2 minutes on the clock. Say what you're going to say. Then we're going to go to closing statements, starting with Eris.
Yeah, no, I said it. I think this comes down to just different value systems. I draw a line at saying that I would critically support these groups because they're the only option. If they have views that, a certain class of people are subhuman or behind like global fucking banking conspiracy. I don't understand why that's a wild take. I don't know. I think it just comes down to different value systems at the end of the day. Yeah, I'm done.
All right, thank you, Spectre, and thank you all. Thanks to everyone for participating. We're now going to go to closing statements for this topic. We have one more topic, so everyone stick around. We're going to go from Eris to Haz to Destiny to Charlotte to Spectre, and then Lena is going to finish because she started and she gets to respond to everyone who followed her in the opener. So Eris, 90 seconds uninterrupted. Go ahead.
Well, first, I just wanted to respond to the conversation before I get to those statements, if that's okay. The biggest thing that one of the biggest changes that's happened recently is there is a new Israeli government, and that government literally includes Palestinians or Arab Israelis, depending on your political terminology, right? In the power of the government. Okay, Mansour Abbas is literally a part of that government. The only reason why people don't care about it is because it doesn't serve their political narrative. But yeah, they are a part of that government, and on top of that, it is a coalition government with mostly leftist parties led by a so-called extreme right-winger, but he's basically a puppet king. Okay, that is going to be cycled out, and they believe in a two-state solution. Like, this official party stance of the coalition is literally to perpetuate a two-state solution. Netanyahu is out. So it's a total possibility. And the party that is going to be leading that two-state solution is Fatah, right? Fatah has worked its ass off to legitimize itself from its previous PLO past. And when people say that it's gone downhill, etc. Fatah was always corrupt. It always had problems with corruptions, right? And definitely needs to be fixed. But what they really mean is that Fatah's not trying to kill Jews anymore, and it's not trying to kill civilians anymore. So that's aside from that entire thing. But just in general, Zionism as a whole, right? Even though I really disagree with how it's being enacted, and there's been a lot of problems with it, is that Zionism is not particularly unique, and this obsession of pinpointing and trying to just isolate Israel as being somehow like this unique immoral blight on the world is just not true, right? Particularly in the Middle East. So, for example, right, Zionism itself was inspired by really obviously inspired by like anti-Semitism and like all those things and humanism, but the real thing that pushed it was there was a global nationalist movement as a consequence to imperialism, right? The region of Palestine had been under and basically the entire Middle East had been under various imperialist controls, right? From the Roman Empire, the Abbasid Empire, the Byzantine Empire, the Ottoman Empire, right? Like, this is a region that's still incredibly trying to recover. So yeah, its native populations, which includes Jews, are trying to they're trying to get along, and it's going to be messy, but we need to be supporting productive members who are leading towards peace in the region, not people or not arguments that are just saying that any existence of anything without any kind of compromise is automatically violent, okay, and does not deserve any kind of compromise. But yeah, that's my closing statement.
All right, thank you, Eris. In the interest of fairness for everybody, I didn't want to stop Eris because it seems like she had a lot to say. So everyone now gets a 2-minute and 45-second closing statement if they decide to make use of all that time. Haz, 2 minutes 45 seconds on the clock. Go ahead.
Yes, I'm reviewing the source you gave me. It's from the Institute of War and Peace, which is a Washington, American-based source. So we already have a red flag for bias. The methodology appears questionable in the survey. 61% of those who responded did so online. I'm not sure how representative that is of the rural Afghan population that the Taliban actually has a base in and actually survives and subsists through. So I find this source completely questionable, and in no way do I see this as evidence that a majority of Afghans want a continued NATO occupation. I can't even find the part specifically where you highlighted where it even says this. 46% of Afghans want the US and NATO out of the country once a deal is struck. 33% would have them stay. How does that mean a majority want the US and NATO to still stay in the country?
So I was mistaken. I should have said plurality. Sometimes I will
Okay,
say
it's not a
majority when I mean
majority.
plurality.
Yeah,
Oh,
it's
wait,
not a
that
majority.
even sounded like, did you quote that again? Was that a majority of people
It's,
want America to stay until a peace deal is reached?
46%. So not like majority, plurality. But
Okay.
it's like a
Yeah.
pretty
But that's
big
also once a
plurality.
deal has been reached, right?
Yes, which one has
Mhm.
not been because of the conflict of
But
interest.
that's also, we assume that there's no bias to which I call into question. I would like to see more diverse set of sources on the subject matter before I would believe that the majority of Afghan people want a continued NATO occupation.
This conversation is
Thank
frustrating
you, Haz.
because
all right,
first of
Destiny,
all, it's on
go
so
ahead.
many different topics, and the initial topic is so broad.
So anyway,
that,
whether or not we critically support
I don't
nations
even know what to talk about.
just because they oppose
So I'm
America
just
turned
talking
into an
about the only thing
Israel-Palestine
that seems
debate,
to be
which is fun.
specific.
I mean, I'll start my same position at the beginning. I don't think we should support nations just because they oppose the United States. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Destiny. Charlotte, if you'd like to respond.
I wish I got a
if
chance
you'd
to
like
talk more.
sorry, your statement.
Maybe I
Go
already
ahead.
talked a lot. I don't know.
But we can talk about probably after the panel,
I don't know.
because this is like
Frustrating.
a whole nother conversation about Afghanistan and NATO. Completely different conversation.
I bet you
But,
this Lena person thinks I'm like an
we got
extreme
bogged down in
Zionist
literally
right
just
now.
it was just an Israel versus
And I'm
Palestine
not at all.
debate,
Like, it's
which, I
just
mean,
like,
it's fine. It's still an important issue.
when I heard that
and,
Freudian
people should
slip,
talk
I'm
about
like,
it. But like, we didn't really get into like the weeds
we want to
of
wipe
like
out we
like
want to
what
remove
we
all the Jews from the
find,
region. I
like,
mean
disagreeable
Israel.
about like
Okay.
the specifics of what's worth like defending a group and siding with a group critically, and like where that line is. And we never really discussed like the general concept. We just got bogged down in specifically Hamas, which is,
Okay,
I mean,
DP
that's fine,
Shash.
but whatever. That's all I gotta say.
Sorry about that if you were uninterested in like specifically.
No.
Hamas,
I'm always interested in talking about Israel-Palestine, but I was sometimes, mix it up, right? You talk about other things.
Yeah. All right. We're going to go to Spectre.
Right. So, yeah, if we're just answering the critically support groups simply due to the fact that they oppose American imperialism, however you define that, I don't think that Hamas is worthy of leftist critical support specifically.
It's crazy that someone could just say that they're like casually supporting Hamas when you just look at like what literally their leaders say. It's just like accepted. It's just chill. It's like, oh, it's a little yikesy opinion. Like
they engage in anti-Semitic rhetoric. I don't think
like it's the equivalent of supporting someone like David Duke. I mean, even worse.
Take to have.
Sorry, I was trying not to be emotional. I mean, like Hamas has literally killed like my childhood friend when I was 9 years old.
All right, thank you, Spectre. All right, Lena,
sorry,
last
when I was 11.
word on this topic, and then we'll take a small break, and then we're gonna
and they joyed. They were happy she was dead. It wasn't like, oh, we're sorry we accidentally killed a civilian. They were like, they're happy that they killed a little Jewish woman.
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry about bogging down the debate.
But yeah, they're just fighting against colonial imperialism.
Yeah, I would like to respond
because
to
that little Jewish girl. She's really like a. Really, what a colonial entity she is.
Which was, no one's talking about the new government, which includes an Arab party. That's because the Arab party is a handful of seats. The government was formed to oust Netanyahu, and it's composed of so many parties, it's almost guaranteed to fall apart. This is not, I do not think this is a controversial view. With regard to everything else, I do not believe in peace for peace's sake. I believe in peace to achieve some sort of goal for justice, and the peace process is not that. So that's it. And with regard to the larger question, which is what I actually want to talk about, fundamentally, it's dependent on who we is defined as. If you're talking about communists, specifically, communists and socialists specifically, oppose the enemy at home and don't let it harm people abroad, and also don't legitimize American violations of sovereignty or backing of states or governments which are hostile to their people.
But she's legitimizing an organization that literally tries to kill children. Okay.
But with regard to where the line is, again, it's really dependent on a multitude of factors. Of course, ideological alignment is one of them, but I would argue it's a minor one. It's more about in which way they are opposed to those interests. Fundamentally, groups like ISIS and Boko Haram are not in particular really that opposed to American interests, other than toppling American set-up governments.
Dang, Frank, if you disagree with me on that, that's totally fine, right? I don't mind engaging in a conversation like that. It's just, it's such a detailed conversation that I would really like to just focus in on that.
They're resisting for
and we're just dealing such broad ideas.
It's not anti-colonial.
Like, you don't really get anywhere.
But that's all.
All right. Thank you, Lena. Thank you all for that excellent discussion on that first topic. We are going to take a 3-minute
Affinity, the
break
IDF
now,
has
so
killed
if you need
kids
to, like,
too.
get a drink,
Like, I
use the bathroom,
agree,
anything like that,
right? But the
feel free
IDF
to
does
run
not
away from
try
your
to kill
keyboard,
children, and they
we will
don't like
reconvene
take
at,
joy in it.
8:50. Sorry, that
It's like a little different. I still don't like the IDF. I literally, I sacrificed more than almost anyone in this fucking like room.
Right back.
Okay, that are watching to not join the IDF. Okay, I do not like the IDF, but like saying that they're on the same level as Moz is just not true. Not true.
Wow, good job, guys.
Wait, what happened? Wait, what happened?
He got so pissed off that you went AFK that he just left the panel. We don't know when he's coming back now.
Like, I know the primary source is on a PDF somewhere, but it's probably hidden in a fucking website somewhere, and I hate when people cite polls in news stories and they don't have a hyperlink to the fucking poll. It's really obnoxious.
Well,
Destiny, how do you restream with subs on?
I just do what I do.
It hurts.
Wait, I didn't go AFK. I don't understand. Did I just like mishear what he said? I understand he thought I went AFK?
No, I was completely fucking. I made that up completely. We're on a 5-minute break. Sorry.
What the? Oh, god damn it! Fucking hate you.
So is Vosh gonna box me or no?
Doesn't seem like it.
Damn.
You two are gonna box?
Yeah, they're gonna box. It's gonna be a big fight.
I would pay to see that.
He told his viewers on stream he would, but when I DM'd him, I guess he doesn't want to anymore.
I actually thought Hans was upset with me for a second. Very annoying.
Good. Is it called the Aila? I thought there was people were saying that anti-Semitism started in Europe, but my understanding is that there were a lot of Jews from Middle Eastern countries that eventually started to flee to Israel once it was set up in the 40s. Is that not true?
Actually, the
know. It's true.
majority of Israelis are not even white Jews. They are brown Jews, like Mizrahis, from the Middle
Yeah.
Eastern countries.
I'm gonna continue to search for the like
You're pulling an Eris
Institute of War
here.
and Peace, like their PDF, like so I can like the whole breakdown, because I that would be good for me, and also I do want to get it for you.
Yeah.
But
But you know,
like
11% of people in Afghanistan have internet access, and 60% of
but
people.
80% have phones.
But
and-
internet access is internet access.
Indigo, thank you so much for that sub with Prime.
60% of
I
respondents
really
did so through the
appreciate any
internet.
subs I get tonight.
That's what
Because
it
normally
says.
I could talk to my chat, but yeah, tonight I can't really.
I mean, it
I'll talk
sounds like
after.
with that standard, then you
after
wouldn't trust any
the
polling
panel,
data
I'll kind of
for
do a
Afghanistan.
post-analyzation.
people
But like
ever,
the
right?
survey of Afghanistan from the Asia Institute, all of it is face-to-face interviews in all 34 provinces.
Do you guys think
That's
like,
it's
what
too
it-
aggressive?
it is possible.
39% was face to face, and
No,
we don't know.
I'm saying for the survey of
Post-debate
Afghanistan,
after
like it's a different, like for a different poll. Like I'm saying in response to Destiny that like there are survey methods that are effective.
If people are annoyed that
and
I'm made about
foolproof in
Israel Palestine, I
Afghanistan
literally
because
got
they're all
invited to talk
face-to-face
about
in
Israel
all
Palestine.
34
Like that was what I
provinces.
got invited for. Just
Can you provide the link to that one?
I did. It's in chat. Yeah,
Oh, honey.
it's all those screenshots of like blurbs and numbers and in general
This one's
discussion.
different. It's from the Asia Foundation.
Thanks, Indigo.
Perception that the ANA and ANP, what does that stand for?
Do you need to be a rap god?
I
You
don't
honestly
remember
were
what ANP
reserved.
stands
Like
for, but
sometimes you
ANA
could have
is
pushed
Afghan
harder. Oh,
National
thanks,
Army.
Stoic. I wanted to push
Well,
harder,
yeah,
but
that
I don't know. Maybe
they
it's because
need
I'm a
foreign
woman. I have
support,
no
but does that
fucking
mean
clue.
that
But
they want
I wanted
foreign
to go
support?
harder, but I didn't
Like
want
the
to like.
government
Wait, what does
needs-
that mean?
I
the
kept being
government
worried that it
needs
would be
foreign
mean.
support. Most people agree the government needs foreign support, but do most people support the government?
So if you have a bunch of intersecting facts, like they think the ANA needs support, right?
Yeah.
They are completely opposed to the Taliban, right? In
Tell me,
all
Nugget.
shapes and forms, ideologically, institutionally, culturally.
Yeah,
In
Dank
the
Frank,
survey.
I
Kabul
am so
government,
uneducated
right?
on the Taliban.
and
I have no clue.
they don't want the
Why
foreign
is it my
forces to
mouth
leave
moving?
until a peace deal is struck, which means peace, right, with the Taliban. I don't know how you could take all of these facts into consideration
Trust
and
me,
then
Mophysic.
in good
Oh,
faith,
okay.
like
I
not
appreciate you
like
saying that.
infer that like when they mean like need foreign support, it means they
you're
like
Okay, I won't say
think
your
that
name,
is
but thank you. That
necessary.
means a lot.
Okay, hold on. A few
Thank you
things.
so much for
I'm just saying
subscribing.
from the graph I saw,
I won't
it's
say
just
your
that they
name.
need foreign support. It doesn't say anything about whether they support.
I
As for
appreciate you
opposition to
giving
the
me those
Taliban, it
those
seems
subs.
like
That
the
means a
respondents
lot.
of this survey
Keeps me doing what I'm
overwhelmingly
doing.
have no sympathy at all, 85%. But what I want to know is I want to know more about the
If you don't
methodology,
end
and I
your
want
rant
to
to that, you
look
fuck your
into
mother. You probably worked
the
very hard.
PDF
Oh
that's
my
linked
god.
has an entire methodology page. You just control F
which
methodology.
PDF. Which PDF?
Oh,
the Asia
AsianFoundation.org
Foundation one.
yeah.
But
Okay,
I felt
I'd
bad
have to
calling her
review it.
unproductive.
I'd have to review it, and I'd
Like
also
that
have to
was
see
I
if this
didn't I don't
represents
like
the
calling
majority of
people
Afghans or the
things like
majority
that, but
of educated,
to me that's
urbanized
so mean
Afghans,
to
'cause
call
that's
someone
often a
unproductive.
difference that's
Like
overlooked.
that just shows you
So
where my
I
head's
don't
at.
know
Eris
those things.
here.
But
Sorry.
I
No,
don't know.
continue. Sorry.
But
I
yeah,
would
but
like
she
to
is
point
like
out
I mean
that,
she literally thinks that he exists. It's like okay.
Mizrahi Jews are, yes, a plurality, but just barely. There's about an even mix of Ashkenazi and Mizrahi Jews in Israel. The populations are about equal, with a slight edge to Mizrahi.
Lena, if you could put your camera back on, we're ready to start.
Oh, yes.
Oh, thank you so much for that hype train.
No problem.
Crash Planet, thanks so much for that subscription.
All right, excellent. Again, everyone, thank you. We're about to start our next topic. Again, just quickly before we start, thanks to all the people who followed and subbed during this time. Follows are greatly appreciated, but I want to remind everyone,
No,
especially
follow
those
me.
who are new, that I have a great IRL job, that I don't need money from internet stuff at all.
Citizen
So
Cicero,
please
thanks so much for
support other
gifting that
streamers if you're going
sub
to
to
drop
get us to
subs
level
and
2.
that sort of shit. But follows are
Thank
always welcome.
you.
Anyway, our next and final topic of the evening, we're probably going to talk about this for about an hour, is there anything that can be done to deal with or fix infighting or purity testing on the left, and can those left of center in America and the world over ever form effective/successful political coalitions? We're going to start with Destiny, and then go to Charlotte, then Spectre,
damn it, I keep
then
missing
Lena,
it. He speaks
then
so
Eris,
fast
and
and he
then
makes a
Haz
point.
gets the last word, and then the final word for the and Destiny gets the first and the last word of this topic. So with a minute and a half on the clock, and everyone, please keep opening closing statements to less than 90 seconds. I completely believe in all of your capacity to do that, and keep regular statements under 2 minutes if at all possible, unless we agree otherwise. Destiny, 90 seconds on this topic. Take it away, buddy.
I think that the most important thing when it comes to keeping allies and keeping people together and reducing infighting is to try to center in on common policy points or common solutions for problems, rather than focusing on some ideological purity through and through for every single
Guys, let's
possible
get to our
position that
level
could
3
exist in some
okay?
utopian world. It feels like a lot of us want to aim for positions that are maybe further along than other people, but we should still recognize that there are a lot of stops along the way that we can all share. And I think it's important to build on our commonalities that way in order to have a coalition of people that are moving towards common goals, rather than people that are getting divided because they don't want to know if they want to stop at Y or Z when we haven't even gotten through the ABCs. So for instance, people that are making enemies of each other because they don't know if they want a public option versus single payer is such a sad waste of time to me, when we don't have any form of universal health coverage at all in the United States.
All right, thank you, Destiny. We are going Red Charlotte, your turn.
Yeah, I think the notion of infighting, even between leftists and liberals, right, is really overblown. I think it is absolutely a non-issue in literally every other country that has had a socialist or strong center-left coalition and movement.
Thank you,
Every single
you know
time,
you want to. It's
Marxists,
just $5, okay?
liberals, and social democrats are able
It's a little
to
$5
create
to
large
you, and it means the
coalitions
world to me.
to defeat
Okay?
opposition, conservative, and national parties.
No pressure, but yes,
this
lots of
happened
pressure.
in the Nordics. This happened in Western Europe, and even at times it's happening right now. What do you think the DSA is?
And I stream
That's all
almost
gotta
every
say.
day.
All right, thank you, Charlotte. Spectre?
Yeah, I'm pretty much in agreement with what's already been said by Destiny and Charlotte. I agree with Charlotte that it's a little bit of an overblown issue. As far as I can tell, this exists mostly in online community. And as Destiny pointed out, it's often over stuff that we're just not even there yet, that we need to be burning bridges over these issues. People aren't even just fighting over, public option versus single payer. They're fighting over, my utopian workers' democracy versus your utopian workers' democracy.
There's only
And I
one
think that this is
minute
very
left
much a
to the
product
hype
of
train.
the internet. I don't think that people who actually go out and get politically involved have the time for these things. So yeah,
maybe someone else will
how
buy
we
us up
take
if you're in
that
a hard situation.
kind of political hobbyism
I don't want to
kind
put
of
you to
steer
put
people
yourself
in a
in a bad spot.
direction where they're thinking about things pragmatically and useful. Be what I would say we need to improve to make it easier for us to build coalitions and work together on the left.
All right, thank you, Spectre.
I'm
Lena?
stoic.
My fundamental question is, what is the left? What is classified as the left? How do we sort this category? Where are its boundaries? And secondly, what are the circumstances? And thirdly, to what extent? So if the question is social democratic policy goals, there is broad unity in real life. Infighting is, at this specific moment in time, a problem which exists only on the internet and doesn't occur in smaller leftist sort of hubs. It's mostly a problem once you get to very, very large scale body politics.
Pulling an Eris
I think
here.
I used that term right.
Thank you so
But
much for that sub.
yeah, that's broadly my
Thank you,
position.
Susan Cicero. 20 seconds, guys.
It just depends on what you're trying to achieve.
All right, thank you, Lena. And for the purpose of this discussion, I framed it as left of center, right? So like the 50% on like what you consider like on the left side of any given like political community, or sorry, country. All right, Eris, go ahead.
I think in general, the best way to unite anyone, any group of people, is to have a common enemy. You know, speaking from history, and that tends to be what happens on average. For example, having someone like Trump really united a lot of people together to ban against them, or having someone like Netanyahu unite a lot of people against them to work towards progressive change. It's a sad fact about humanity. But just in general, I do wish that I feel like I can be really guilty of this too, because, you know, we're all humans in a society, as one says. And it's easy to start pulling onto these, jumping onto these habits of just always purity testing everyone, expecting people, seeing people as either good or bad, or they're problematic or they're not problematic. And I'm I can't tell you how often someone's just withdrawn support from me because I had one bad opinion or something like that. And even people on this panel, I've seen people treat infrared terribly, right? Just because of they disagreed with them on one thing or something. It's a really problematic attitude, and it just gets us absolutely nowhere. And it's a very childlike view of the world, and it reminds me a lot of 17th century style, puritanical Christianity, and I wish we'd get past it. Luckily, it seems to be mostly online right now, but I'm concerned about that kind of moving into the real world, so we should just put a cap on that.
All right, thank you, Eris. All right, Haz, you have the last opening statement. Everyone is now welcome to start raising your hands for the general discussion. All right, Haz, take it away.
Yes, my position is pretty simple, but it might seem confusing at first. Being left for the sake of being left, or what you perceive to be the left-wing position, is actually right-wing. If you look at the origins of the left, the whole point was the people on the left side of the National Assembly during the French Revolution who were for the revolution, as opposed to the established forms of monarchy and constitution and so on and so on. So the basic,
Olaf,
the
totally
real
agree with you
meaning
there.
of being a leftist is to ground your position in some kind of determinate content that actually doesn't have any regard and is completely indifferent for where that's going to land you on the political spectrum. For example,
Frank,
the point isn't that
thank you so much for subscribing.
You don't first say I want to be a leftist and align with left-wing values. You say I'm for the revolution in the case of France. Obviously now it's different, and then accidentally you're placed in the left. Now,
really appreciate
as far as America is concerned at this specific decisive juncture, I think that there is only one real left-wing position, and that is the pursuit of some kind of third party alternative to the Republicans and the Democrats. And in that,
like the Nazis,
that is something in the pursuit of which I am willing to engage with people
Nazi.
who possess a diversity of
Nazi.
views. I don't really care if someone identifies as a leftist or not, because being a leftist is to me an essential. I do consider myself a leftist, but not because I want to be a leftist, but just because it's a byproduct of a more fundamental position.
All right, thank you, Haz. All right, so we're going to start the list. The only person on right now is Lena. So, Lena, take it away, and everyone's welcome to start raising their hand to respond to anything Haz has said. All right, go ahead.
So it really does depend on where you are, and you have to define that. You can't just say, I want to include everyone, because that's how you get, look at the DSA. The DSA is a very big tent party. It is, in some cases, a good thing, but when it comes to elected officials, and because the caucusing of the Democrats, you get a bunch of people.
Wedgemop, thank you so much for those follows, by the way.
Vote for them. You get the benefit of primarying, but the DSA has no institutional power, and the DSA, because its politics are so ill-defined, because it doesn't have a strict line, has no discipline, has no ability to force its people, its representatives, to do anything, which is why, as an organization, it is currently extremely ineffectual. And clearly, this isn't working, and it's not going to result in any It might result in some social democratic programs, but I doubt even that. And if you're talking about a leftist program, a communist program, a revolutionary program, there's no way to do that. The fundamental purpose, and I'm going to talk way past all of the social democrats here, the fundamental purpose of a party participating in bourgeois electoral parliaments is to demonstrate the farce of democracy to the workers, to the working class. That's the purpose. And to sort of, but if you have no discipline, if you can't force your representatives, even as in a social democratic party, to do things for you, to vote a particular way, what's the point? What's the point?
You're pulling in
All
narratives
right.
here.
Thank you, Lena. All right, Spectre.
Combo, thank
Right,
you so much for
I don't think it's fair to say
subscribing.
that DSA
Thank
doesn't
you.
accomplish much, especially because it's just like, you know, it's chapter by chapter, right? The chapter that I was like involved with in Los Angeles did a lot of work with homelessness. The one here in Austin got the city government to completely decriminalize homelessness, which they're now fighting to keep decriminalized. But the DSA does good work. But your contention seems to be that they support Democrats in election. You'd rather they what? I mean, the Communist Party of the USA and Biden.
My contention isn't necessarily, I mean, I get the DSA strategy. I don't expect the DSA to form some sort of communist vanguard party or whatever. But with regard to what they have done, the representatives they do have, they don't have a line. They don't have any discipline for them. They don't have any way to punish them. They have no institutional power to do that. And if you're talking about where your line is on the left,
yeah, but it seemed like you were also
that's why you
critiquing
need
them.
to define it.
Yeah, but you were also critiquing them for being a
I'm not
Big
even
Ten party,
technically
which
a
I mean, I would
leftist,
think
so-
that the way that you get the
I don't
power to
even
be
know
able
what
to
to say in
hold
this
your representatives
conversation.
accountable is you bring more people over to your way of thinking. Like that's how it works in democracy, right?
Yes.
So we want to have a big tent and we
Well,
want to bring
guys,
as many people like
as
into
an
that as
absolute
possible. That way we
monarchist who would
actually
like to
can hold,
establish
like,
myself as queen.
representatives accountable. No.
Yes,
And all
but
of
if
you
you
are my
don't have the
enemies.
line, the representatives you'll find will be at the most compromising conservative portion of your party, the most moderate, the ones who are tending the most towards that position. If you get me, you fundamentally, if you just accept everyone, then the weakest link in the chain will be what you achieve.
I just feel like people think I'm a
For the
leftist because
purpose
I'm not a
of this
bigot.
discussion, Lena,
Yeah.
if you could briefly like explain to like what your line is, or like what the harder line that you would want from like say
One day, 6
left-leaning
foot.
groups or parties like the DSA. You don't have
I'm
to respond
a
to it right now. We can come back to you. We're
anarcho-socialist.
going to go to Haz first. Lena, what do you think
Anarcho-socialist.
about that? And then maybe give us some of those lines about those specific things. So Haz, and then Lena, and then Destiny.
I think something should be clarified. Doing good work, quote unquote, is not actually inherently relevant toward questions of political strategy. Charity is also good work, and I'm not saying that ironically, but it's not the same as having an effective or meaningful political strategy. It's very clear to me that the DSA is the quote unquote left wing of the Democratic Party, and that's all it'll ever be. But what's even more pathetic about it, in my view, is that I don't even think Biden has secured a foothold in acquiring legitimacy in the eyes of half of the country. Half of the country seems like they don't even recognize Biden as president. So for the DSA to take liberties to be the quote unquote left wing of the Democrats, a party that doesn't have legitimacy in the eyes of half of Americans, rather than working to build an independent base of their own in the American people, seems like it's not only going to be an appendage to the Democratic Party in objective practice, but it's even going to be it's even going to harm the Democratic Party, because as we know, the Democratic Party as it is has a hard time gaining legitimacy in the eyes of half of Americans. For the
Guys,
for the Democratic Socialists to take the Democrats
This
as
is
their
what came up,
foundation and then
okay?
use that to take all of these liberties and calling themselves socialists and radicals and all this kind of stuff without building a foundation of their own. They have a foundation on
I
thin
swear on my
air.
life, love.
All right.
So you want a vanguard party, and the DSA isn't a vanguard party.
That
So
literally
that's not
came
good,
up.
basically.
I think that's a more ideologically loaded phrase. I like the more American context
Like, why
phrase,
is it
a
part of
third party,
necessarily
a
what?
people's party, a vaguely populistic
The giggle is anti-Semitic.
party, which I think communists will have decisive significance in, but I
The
think we have to
legit
prove that. But for now, I think the
I know,
correct
that's why it's
position
really
is some
funny,
kind of
fried
third
chicken.
party. What that looks like is a matter of further discussion in detail.
Right. So a third party has never been able to wield any kind of actual political power in this country. Do you have any ideas as to why that might be?
Yes, it's very clear to me that we don't live in a so-called liberal democracy. We live in a country in which the Democrats and the Republicans, whether that's by custom
Yeah, Dank,
or
I
whether
know one
that's
of the
by
girls
some
that was
kind
on
of
that.
deeper
It was really amazing.
enforcement of some kind of rules.
Alas, they didn't
is
want
of
to
no,
interview a cartoon.
is not so much important. The fact of the matter is that we have a two-party system. But I believe that we're at a decisive point in the history of American politics in which the two-party system is facing its dissolution.
No, not as long as you still have like freaking gerrymandering, the Electoral College. Ranked choice voting would probably be very helpful for making third parties viable, and your best ally there is going to be the Democratic Party because that also helps them.
Leftists used to support Zionism.
All right.
Most leftists all supported
We're
Zionism.
going to go to Destiny
originally.
and then to Lena. So Destiny, if you want to jump on.
This is like, it's kind of hard when socialists
I've
talk
got
about
lots
like
of
their
problems
political
with it.
aspirations. I think
I
that
just don't like
sometimes it's
shitty-
hard to wrestle with the fact that
I
there just really
don't
aren't
like
that many
shitty,
socialists in the United States in terms of citizens. I notice a lot when very far left people try to talk strategy, you know, they're very quick to point out like, oh, well, the Democrats suppress us, or oh, it's just a two-party system, or oh, the media is against us. I think the reality is there's just not very many people in the United States that identify as socialist or are that far left. And it feels like if like really far left-leaning people want to get more people on board with like really far left-leaning candidates, then they need to be doing more for like advocacy for their beliefs.
Oh, was that my mic?
Yeah, no problem.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
It's okay.
I would say that like the Justice Dems have done a better job, historically at least, or in my lifetime, than I can remember for third parties doing, because especially for
I like how she
libertarians,
apologizes
as an example, there seems to be an obsession
for her mic
over
being open,
trying to
but
elect
not
somebody as
for her
president, and if you
Freudian
can't do
slip
that, you just completely
that the
give
Jews
up on
should get kicked out
everything.
of Israel.
So it really just feel like
you
like
guys
very far
notice
left-leaning
that?
people like supporting like local politicians or even people for federal offices and kind of like building up like that would be the best idea. But I just don't think that there's this huge
You know
support
why?
in
The
the
only
United
reason why they
States for
don't
very
support
far left-wing
Zionism,
people.
in my
And
opinion,
for some reason,
is
like it seems like so many left-leaning people seem to
it's
think that there
because
are. Like the approach they have to U.S.
Israel's
politics
winning
is
the war.
just everybody's a leftist. They either
That's
don't
why.
know it yet,
If
or
Israel was
corporations are
losing, I
lying to them, and
guarantee
that's why
you
they're
they would be
not.
supporting
Instead of
Israel.
thinking like, well, actually,
That's
maybe
like how
legitimately in the U.S.
irrational
there really aren't that many far left.
I really
people.
think a lot of the critiques are.
Thank you, Destiny. We're going to go to
I think
Lena,
it's really
and then
just
Charlotte,
about
and
who
then
is
back to
powerful,
Haz.
who's not.
Lena, go ahead.
I'm going to quickly jump back to my previous point. My point isn't this line should be here. My point is we should determine it because it's based on present circumstances. What I think is that the line should be in the place that offers us the maximum possible concession that gives us the maximum possible concession. So we need to let in exactly as many people as possible to do what needs to be done. And that's a line that we determine not
Stoic,
through
regardless of
pontificating
who you
about
think
it
is the worst morally,
or amongst ourselves, but by doing the work and seeing where that is.
If
And
someone's
with
winning this
regard
war,
to
at the end of the day,
left-wing party, it's not my view that the majority of people in the US are socialists. And I don't think that's anyone's view. That's just not true. But I think the majority of people in the US are, to some level, sympathetic, especially among the so-called working class, or not so-called. I think people are a lot better than people give them credit for. At least that's been my experience.
It's a good point.
Thank you, Lena. All right, Charlotte, go ahead.
I think Destiny is partially right and partially wrong. I think like there is a lack of perspective for a lot of people. Like you said, like, oh, if we don't win, if Bernie doesn't win, then everything's over, right? There's a lot of lack of. I think this might be an online thing only, because I think this is just selection bias on most of our parts. Because when I'm in real life, right, when I'm organizing, when I'm helping like unionize workplaces in real life, right, people understand that the goal isn't just to elect a socialist as president for 4 years, right? Because that's not going to create long-term systemic success, right?
I actually read Charlotte a lot.
Moss in
we have
South
a lot of
America.
disagreements,
You have to
especially with
look
Israel,
at
but
the
I like her a
Swedish
lot.
Social Democrats from the 30s to the 80s, right? Everything is from the bottom up, right? You create large coalitions.
Try to practice
of
what I
organized
preach,
labor,
not like
specifically stuff like
putting
sectoral
people into
bargaining,
just like
sectoral
categories
unions,
because we have a
right,
disagreement.
that can coalesce together and seize state power democratically, right? Which has shown very huge success in South America specifically and in Northern Europe. And this is like a kind of praxis that is sort of, as far as I know, while it exists, it's very low priority for a lot of people because people's concepts of political success are too large in the short term.
All right. Thank you, Charlotte. Destiny, would you like to respond to that before we throw it to Haz? Or are you good?
No, I think I agree.
All right. Haz, go ahead.
I think there's no dispute over the fact that the American people are not quote unquote left wing, and I don't think there's any support or even sympathy for communism or socialism among the American people. But I don't think that's where communism has decisive significance. I don't think the ideology comes first. I think the material reality comes first, and it's the job of communists to give a correct expression to that material reality. What I mean by that is that while most Americans probably don't care about socialism or communism, there's widespread dissatisfaction with Congress. There's widespread dissatisfaction with the two-party system, and the American people seem to agree on a lot of things as far as policy is concerned, and both the Democrats and the Republicans have failed to deliver on the aspirations of the American people. So my goal isn't really that I think communists are out there and all we have to do is make ourselves known and they're going to agree. I think communists have to prove themselves to the American people that they are the best force and best vehicle to represent and carry through their interests. Regarding the Justice Democrats, I sort of agree with this. In the initial stages of the Justice Democrats, they were very effective at getting people elected and becoming a real political force. But it has to also be remembered that this was because the Justice Democrats had a very ambitious, posed a very ambitious threat and challenge to the Democratic mainstream. They represented an entirely new trend and basically were anti-establishment Democrats. The situation has changed now. AOC has completely cut her roots from the people that even got her to power in the first place. So I think we should learn from the lessons of the Justice Democrats, but we should also learn from the way in which people like AOC and others, and also factions of the Justice Democrats themselves who took over and completely shit up the whole thing, so to speak, betrayed it. Now, as a final point, very briefly, I think when we're talking about the Scandinavian model, I think we have to be mindful of the geopolitical significance. There would have been no Scandinavian so-called social democracy without the pressure coming from the Soviet Union, without the US-led global monetary order of which it was a part. Oh my God, fuck. Sorry, I just got thank you so much for the subscription, Melina. Sorry, I just had a notification. Yeah, there would have been no, it wouldn't have been possible. It's not simply because people had right ideas or people were just moderate enough. It was because they were operating within a very specific
Yeah, I've got some
geopolitical
disagreements
context.
with her,
That's
but
all I'd say.
All right. Thank you, Haz. All right.
I think
we're
her
gonna
heart's in the
go
right
to
place.
Spectre, then Lena, then Charlotte. All right. Spectre, go ahead.
Right. So, sorry, can you go on? I gotta look something up.
Yeah, no problem. All right, Lena, go ahead.
Fundamentally, if you want a viable political movement which achieves real change, you cannot simply be a free club of anyone who wants it, and you cannot merely say, oh, we're different because we're a separate organization and we have moderately left to center views. You have to provide a real alternative. You have to differentiate yourself to an extreme extent, not an extreme extent necessarily, but you have to differentiate yourself. And this goes for any political movement. Fundamentally, you also have to implant yourself in the people. You have to, in this day and age, be a people's movement. And that doesn't just mean advocating for the people. That means being a part of the people. That means working with the impoverished, working with the marginalized directly, implanting yourself in those communities, being a part of them, making yourself sort of synonymous with them. And that's how you achieve real political power.
All right. Thank you, Lena. Spectre, did you find what you wanted to make your statement?
Yeah,
Did
I
she
was
just
trying to
argue that you
remember
can
what the
achieve political
latest thing
power
the
by
AOC did to make
having
all
no
the
power?
ultras mad. So
Is that
yeah,
what I
it's her
heard?
healthcare take. This gets right back to like why we can't actually build productive coalitions because of the purity testing. We're excluding her because she won't say I want single payer healthcare and that's what she ran on, therefore it's betrayal. Goes back to exactly what Destiny was saying in his opening statement. At a certain point, we don't have fucking single payer. We don't have a public option. Like, our healthcare system fucking sucks. I'll take any improvement that I can get. And I'm sure that the people who are rationing their insulin at home right now, possibly like dying from it, and we can look at those numbers, will take any help that they can get too. So to make this an ideological issue and then say that AOC is fucking not left enough for us anymore because she moved to a more pragmatic position on healthcare is absurd to me, and it's the
Do you
reason
guys dare
that
me to say that
we
I'm
have to have these
anarcho
conversations about fucking purity
communo-monarchist
testing and like being productive and
and
coalition
argue for
building.
it? I
All right,
won't do it.
thank you, Spectre.
Kind of.
We're gonna go to Charlotte, to Destiny, to Haas.
I
to
like
Lena.
Hans. I won't
All right,
troll his panel.
Charlotte.
Yeah, was it Lena that said it? Results are what is going to give you the vote.
What
right?
we
So,
really
like,
need to establish is a
this is, like,
vanguard
consistently
monarch
seen
to
in all
guard
social
the
democratic
Constitution,
success all
enabling
across Europe.
individual rights of
They
an
gave
anarchist
people-
principle.
They built socialists and communists together, built the welfare states of Europe, like pretty much most of them, in the way that they exist today. From like the 30s, even the 20s, up until the 1980s and the early 90s, these like systems were built like by socialist parties, like SPD, all like in Sweden, in Germany, etc. Right? They gave people results, and the third way only became a thing because after like I think 2 economic crises and then the neoliberal wave of the 80s and 90s that was global during like global
I care about you
recessions,
too.
the parties failed to like meet the task of fixing those specific crises, so they lost power, right? And like we now have the hindsight of like the specific like crises they couldn't handle in the 70s and 80s because they didn't have the economic knowledge, right, that we have now with hindsight and learning from their mistakes, right? So like this worry that without the USSR or some like global socialist hegemon, that social democracy and social democratic parties who are socialists, not third wayers, like can't thrive is just like I don't think is true, because social democrats and social democratic ideology has like precedes the USSR, was in power before the
15
USSR,
minute minus,
and
exactly.
their existence from during the USSR's reign was in direct opposition to the USSR. And like they expressly opposed the communist parties in their countries because they were expressly Stalinist parties and only worked with them in coalitions. When this is like just true.
If you guys want
This
to
is what the
support the
Popular Front
revolution,
was.
please
They worked with them
buy my
because
merch.
they needed to get majority
If
governments.
you believe in supporting the monarch,
Like, do you disagree that these communist parties of the mid 20th century in Europe were primarily Stalinist
revolution.
parties?
You said the Social Democrats
Please
preceded
buy my
the
merch,
USSR's existence. By the
Yeah.
time
That's how
the
you
October
support the
Revolution
revolution.
happened, there was no Stalinism. The Social Democrats helped
That-
murder, as you know,
That's
Rosa
not what I
Luxemburg.
said.
She wasn't a Stalinist.
Help me
that
destroy
had nothing to do
capitalism
with
by
what I said.
by buying my
You
T-shirt.
said that the Social Democrats were set up before the USSR existed, and they opposed.
You know that Germany isn't like the only country in Europe, right?
Well, I'm giving you this division between Social Democrats and communists was not because of quote unquote Stalinism. That's a complete fabrication.
So that's not what I. you're
Why did you mention
you're
Stalinism?
conflating the conflict that happened in the Spartacus Revolution with like the entire conflict of social democrats versus communist parties in the entire 20th century. The reason the
But you
social democrats,
pointed out
the reason the reason the social
Please
democrats,
finish, and then
the reason the social. Oh,
sorry, Charlotte, finish, and then Infrared, you're welcome to respond.
This is so
immediately
American
after.
focused. I
yeah,
feel
I'm
like I've
almost
so little to
the reason the
contribute.
social democrats opposed the Spartacus Revolution is because they were expressly
You've
reformists.
already ordered your Air's box
They didn't
shirts?
believe
I
in
don't think I offer
insurrection
those.
and violent revolution. Why would you expect
I'm
a
actually looking into
reformist
making
party
a
and a
plushie
reformist
and
ideology
a body
to back
pillow.
a violent insurrection? Right? This just doesn't make any sense. When I said they opposed Stalinism, I'm talking about the entire 20th century, not just a single event in Germany.
All right, you're welcome to respond to that. Then we're throwing it to Destiny.
Yeah, I think it goes back to this issue of
Our next
Wikipedia
t-shirt is
panel
gonna have to do with
political
Rome.
analysis. Okay, so
That's your hint.
it's not because of
You're getting special
abstractions
information
about
no one else
ideology
knows.
that the Social Democrats were committed to opposing the Spartacus Revolution. It was because they had entrenched themselves in the
No, Rapid
respective
won't, don't do it.
establishments of their countries materially. Lenin analyzed the material foundations. It has nothing to do with abstract ideological commitments.
I'm actually going on a Canadian panel
Second
this
of
Sunday
all,
night.
you're forgetting, again, the decisive significance of world and global imperialism. And then later, since we want to divide this into phrases, I guess, American-led unipolar global order. This was all of decisive significance and importance for these European social democrats to be able to acquire power. You say that the real reason why the third wave was able to prevail was because of economic crises, and that now we have some kind of special economic knowledge that is necessary foresight. But I think that's a completely irrelevant argument. Firstly, it's just speculation. We know that the Soviet Union was of decisive significance. Around the same time the Soviet Union was collapsing, the whole left across the whole world was in retreat. So there's clearly a correlation at the very least. As opposed to the speculation.
I actually heard the mug's nice. I haven't been able to get the mug myself.
I actually don't really care so much about ideology. I care about a real material analysis. If your view is that, oh, I don't want a revolution, I just want to be able to provide people and fulfill the necessary people's welfare, I completely agree with you. But the whole point of Marxism isn't to say, oh, we need a revolution just to be radical. The whole point is that even when you're pursuing these reforms,
love Hans when he starts
you're
doing
going to
the
find institutional and
when he starts doing the circle thing, it fucking triggers the
that
fuck
require you to build the
distracts
foundations of
me.
an alternative state, because the state's going to rig the system against you. That's what historical experience shows us. And the only examples we can find to the contrary, in the case of social democracy, are parties that were completely entrenched on an institutional basis and were in cahoots.
I'm thinking of doing a special mug that slowly cuts off the heads
point.
of Henry VIII's wives.
Hans, can you chill? I'm like I'm providing the most content on this panel. Be polite to me, dude.
Oh shit.
That's excellent. All right, Destiny, go ahead, buddy.
Fuck. Well, my response was going to be like somebody like 3 or 4 things ago. I think it was to Lena. But I feel like I'm derailing if I respond to that point. I guess, broadly speaking, when people on the left talk about flexing a lot of political power in the United States, people get really upset about AOC or the justice system's not doing enough. I think, again, it's an extension of what I said earlier. I don't think that leftists are as popular in the United States as they seem to think so. They seem to think that, like AOC and the rest of the justice systems can flex all this power and obstruct all the processes. But the reality is that they just don't have the support to do it. People look at like Manchin and are like, well, Manchin can do it. So why can't AOC be as influential as Manchin? Because if AOC is knocked out, there's 7,000 more Democrats that will jump up and take her seat immediately. If Manchin is knocked out, then that seat's probably going to a Republican, right? It seems like being more closer to the center, having more popular support is the way to get your ideas passed. If you want to branch off and form your own party and do that, that's fine. But now you're losing all of your influence in the Democratic Party, which is the only place you could reasonably push for change. And now you're just going to be relegated to some completely and totally oblivious, random, non-important third party that gets about as much done as the Libertarian Party does.
Thank you, Destiny. All right, Lena. Oh, sorry, Lena, and then into Eris. All right, Lena, go ahead.
So fundamentally, if you can't make your representatives adopt a line, if they have to adopt the most centrist line anyway, then you have no institutional power. There is none. It's what you get is fundamentally indistinguishable from someone cynically running on a platform and then abandoning it to the center. What is the distinction here? Fundamentally, if that's the case, then this work is worthless. There's nothing that you've done except guarantee that slot isn't going to a more rightward Dem. Fundamentally, in that instance, you are forced into working on base building, which is the only way that you're going to do these things. You just need to have the geographic concentration. You need to have the people on the ground integrating themselves or being a part of the community, building these alternative structures and making the people see your movement as fundamentally part of themselves, as fundamentally a part of their identity, as being a part of this community.
All right, thank you, Lena. We're
None of
gonna
her
go
rhetoric
to.
makes
Wait, can I
sense.
respond to that real quick?
It's
Yeah,
just
go
like
ahead.
random shit. She speaks like in tweets.
Yeah, so
Is it just me?
I think the problem is that if you could choose to have we'll say in the Senate, I know AOC is a congressman, but if you could have
Just rhetoric.
50 justice Dems in the Senate that have compromised on some legislation to get there, you'd rather that than 50 moderate Dems that aren't compromising but are passing exactly what they want. The more left-leaning representation you have, even if they are willing to meet and pass more centrist-leaning legislation, means that they are going to have that much more pull in the future. One of the most interesting kind of like ironic twists of fate that has happened is AOC actually, in my opinion, probably has a very promising career ahead of her in politics. And it's largely because she learned to grow up out of that idealistic Twitter phase of I'm just going to attack my party all day long and get
It's like when people say,
absolutely
like,
nothing
oh,
done.
like we need a
which she
revolution
hasn't
demographic.
really.
Like, what does that
And instead
mean?
start working
Describe
with
to me
party
the
leaders and
detail.
seniority
Are
to
you
try
talking
to
about,
figure
like,
out like,
three
well, what
homeless
can I
people have no
pass? What can I
meaning?
advocate for on the
I
side
want to
to
hear.
kind of make that slow move to the side.
I want to hear the details.
It seems that like on the internet and in other places in these spaces where I hear these talks, it's like if we don't get the full leftist movement right now, then forget everything. We're done. We don't care. But like getting those left-leaning senators or those left-leaning Congress people in there that will advocate for more left positions when they can, but is willing to meet the party when they need to, that's like the important thing that you're going to need to establish to get real change done if you want it to move further and further left. Otherwise, again, all you're doing is kneecapping yourself and just completely giving that entire, you're ceding that whole space to centrists. You know, like I hear people over and over again say like, why? Well, Biden didn't do anything to appease Bernie. Biden didn't do anything. Well, of course not, because they lost. They lost miserably. They got destroyed against Hillary Clinton and against Biden. They got destroyed. So nobody's going to make concessions to that side of the party. So you have to come a little bit more to the center. You have to like join that coalition, and then hopefully over time you can slowly move them left if your ideas are good or good enough to convince people that they're good.
Lena, you're welcome to Lena, you're welcome to respond to that, and then we're going to go to Eris, Spectre, Charlotte, and then Haz.
If you have reduced the distinction between yourself on the left and in the center, and you are compromising so much to achieve these marginal gains that might not particularly mean much, and you're just having to hold in this holding pattern while you wait for the support and wait for the representatives and legislators, then the lack of results is just going to turn people off. It's going to drive them away. You have effectively doomed yourself because you are incapable of making good on those promises that people want, of getting people the things that they need. If you're not able to do that, then how the hell are you going to get more representatives in more difficult areas?
Destiny, do you want to do a quick response to that, or can we throw it to Eris?
Well, I mean, like, I mean, do you reckon, like, Hillary Clinton said it best? We've got public and private positions. If you think if you think that a vote on a piece of legislation is every single thing that a person in Congress represents, I don't know what to say to you. If that's what you think, then I mean, you're politically fucked anyway.
I mean, it's. Oh, sorry. Are you done?
Well, yeah. I mean, like if there were 50 AOCs in the Senate and they could only get like a medium like healthcare bill passed, like some extension of the ACA. Let's say next midterm cycle, you get 10 more Democrats in the Senate, you've got 60. Well, what do you think is going to happen? They're not just going to continue to vote moderately, right? You vote as far left as you're able to.
So fundamentally, yes, but how do you get to the point where you have 50 AOCs when you have to start at 1, and people are going to want to see this is something new. They want to see something exciting. They want to see results. Which is why, fundamentally, okay, sure, it just doesn't look good to compromise on those positions.
It doesn't look good, but that's because the left is largely uneducated about how the U.S. political system works. You're not going to see major, like, extreme change like that happening. It just doesn't work that way. I'm sorry.
Do you think the general population that voted for that person is going to see it that way either? They voted for that person expecting to get some sort of concrete result.
No, they don't see it that way, but that's why they're so politically ineffective. It's because they don't understand how any of our system works. That's why they're turning their backs. So that's why you see people like Jimmy Dore and Brianna turn their backs on people like AOC, who are their best allies in Congress, who still do support things like the Green New Deal and who would support single-payer healthcare. But because they're not completely squandering all of their political opportunity and all of their political power by constantly fighting on Twitter or screaming at Pelosi all day, they're like, oh, well, fuck them. We don't want anything to do with this person anymore.
I mean,
so what are you going to do? Like, you're fucked.
So you've essentially... For a movement to gain significant traction, you do need results, and you need big results, concrete results. And I don't see that capable of happening. I don't think yelling at Pelosi on Twitter will achieve that either. I guess my position is more, okay, so we can't focus on electoralism for now. It won't work. We got to focus our attention, our energy somewhere else, just in another place. So that we can
like where?
But then it's just confusing because you're critical of groups like the DSA that do focus their efforts outside of electoralism. And I mean,
Can we just butt in whenever like this?
1 second. Like Lena, take a second to think about what you mean when you say like outside electoral process. We're gonna go back to the list real quick.
Right.
And yeah. Also, everyone, if you do jump in, please remember to say quick response so I know that you're not just like randomly like flying. All right, Eris, Spectre, Charlotte, and then Haz. Eris, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main disagreement is like, I don't know if it's a misunderstanding of how democracy works or just like willfully being ignorant of it or just arguing that you don't want the system that we have right now and replace it with another system. I mean, that's another conversation. To me, what makes much more sense, right? If, for example, if you're like a Marxist, okay, I don't know if the people on the panel are Marxists, not sure, right? But say if you're a Marxist, okay, and to me, it would make much more sense to focus on teaching Marxist theory, educating people about false perceptions that they have about communism or about communist regimes, or like correcting, like, for example, like right now, like a lot of the things that people get taught in history about Marxism is just completely incorrect, right? In terms of like, you know, Holodomor, things like that, right? So there are like some aspects that, like, to me would make sense to focus on in terms of education, but you've got to genuinely change people's minds, you know, and move people slowly to your side. But meanwhile, that's going on. Like there's like actual detrimental effects. So if I say didn't vote, I mean, if I was an American, right, and extremely, say I was like a super extreme, like Marxist socialist or something, right, and I didn't vote for Trump because if I didn't vote for Hillary Clinton because Hillary Clinton, you know, is so far away and I had to compromise too much for Marxism, right? The consequence of that is like even like Trump is even worse for it, right? And then like literally say if I was Muslim or something, it's going to have like real effects. It's going to split Muslim families and all that stuff when it comes to like the Trump Muslim ban. Like there were real like on the ground effects and consequences to, you know, to Trump taking power. So it always feels like it comes, and I know not everyone is this case, but it always feels like it comes from like this weird place of privilege or something, like when people don't at all want to participate in any kind of democratic process, or they act like it's completely irrelevant, or they're not willing to compromise at all.
All right, thank you, Eris. I want to throw it to Spectre.
Right, yeah, this is where I get frustrated, because it's like, well, electoralism is bunk and we can't do that, but fuck groups like the DSA because they support Democrats, even though they do like leftist organizing outside of electoralism. And then we look at people like AOC, who are probably going to be the furthest left people that you can get elected, her and Omar. And they move just, they compromise a little bit on healthcare. They're not going to be able to get single payer. They acknowledge that, and suddenly these people just, well, they're not going far left enough. We're done with them. We're casting them out. Like, yeah, you're politically irrelevant. There's a reason for that. And I mean,
I don't like the Soviet regimes, but we are. But like in general, the West teaches
twice now.
The Soviet regime.
So I don't know why they're going to be paying attention to anything that they have to suggest or say, unless they actually start getting results. One way to do that is to expand the amount of people in this country who currently have healthcare. Will we get universal coverage? No, probably not. But again, like for the person who's rationing their actually going to be able to get health care now under whatever plan that AOC is supporting and Ilhan and Omar are supporting, that's going to be a big difference in their life. And that's more what I care about than even optics at the end of the day, to be very frank. But I also think that it's good optically.
All right, thank you, Spectre. Charlotte, and then Haz. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think like this entire conversation, like not to be like mean, it's like it seems very terminally online, because like in real life organizing, nobody has these,
I agree
like,
with her here.
Well, not nobody, obviously, not categorically, but like most people who organize know that this is a long-term process. This is not like people expecting these like short-term like political gratification where it's like, oh, I've been pushing for the Green New Deal for 3 years. It hasn't happened yet. There's no fucking point, right? Like 3 years politically is nothing, right? Like even if you talk on like a revolutionary basis, like I think like the Mao and the Chinese Communist Party's like revolution took the course over like 27 years, right? It took 27 years of fighting and building like support to and a World War II to eventually topple the Chinese government. And the same thing with the Bolsheviks. If
I'm not a Marxist. I just don't.
There might not have been a Bolshevik revolution,
you know? And there are a lot of lies about the Soviet regime.
Like, these things take a very long time, which is why the DSA is so great, because the DSA is focused while they have a
That's not to say they're great. Trust me, I'm not saying that.
like
I don't want people
political
to think
wing
I'm taking.
where they push and
I just respect
elect,
truth over
push
ideology.
and
This is why I always tell you guys I'm not
support,
very
like,
political. I'm
politicians to get elected.
I'm very focused on
most, if
historical
anything,
stuff.
DSA work is on the ground, organizing, creating like
To me,
the ability for mass
I want to
action,
research facts. I
and
want to
like
give you guys
creating
facts.
communities,
And I'm sure there are
of
plenty of people who are
can be
smarter than me
educated
politically and
like
ideologically.
turned into
As long as
large
they have the
coalitions of
correct
support.
facts, to me, it's more.
Which is
They'll come to
why,
more
like,
correct
stuff
position,
like the
and I'll
PRO
leave that
Act,
to them.
there should be as much support and push for the PRO Act and like organizing for the PRO Act as there is for pretty much any policy that we could possibly think of in the short term. Because with the PRO Act, you open up the doors to mass organize people in their workplace. And historically, what's been shown is when you help organize people in their workplaces, it becomes much easier to
Oh yeah, I will be the
get
first
them
to
on
tell
the
you that I probably
socialist
have a
train and to
billion
support
dumb political
socialism.
takes.
Like, this
That's why I
happened,
don't call myself a
basically every
politics
single
streamer.
country.
I'm not expecting
Thank you,
people to pay
thank you,
attention to me for
Charlotte.
politics.
Haz, go ahead, buddy.
I think a lot of the confusion here
I know a lot
has to
about
do with
research
framing this
and
in terms
historical
of
accuracy.
the political spectrum, because there's all sorts of complications that make this an ineffective.
My goal
way
is really
to
just
look
to
at the
arm
actual
people with
political
context,
situation from perspective
and
of political
broaden
strategy.
their view from being
Specifically in
narrow to
regards
wide.
to Destiny. It seems like you.
It's one of the
have
reasons
this
why we have such a
implicit
diverse
assumption
community
that
here
the
of
current
like
political
right-wingers,
alignments within
lefties,
Congress and the current quote-unquote
anyone.
political spectrum is because of abstract ideas and ideals, rather than the fact that this in some way represents constituents. It represents the sentiments and interests, material interests of the constituents that these representatives are voting for. And if we operate on it from that basis, the issue with AOC isn't that she's not being far left or she's not pursuing left-wing values for the sake of being left-wing. It's where she aligns in regard to these real material politics. She has. It's not that we are. See, for example, we have to define the significance of single player in terms of the impediment to it. Now, we can assume that the reason we can't have single player is because the American people are just more moderate, but the example of history shows us that's not the case. The reason we can't have single payer is because there's an establishment, an institutional barrier to its realization. Now, politics and charity are two entirely different things. Politics is about representing the people in some kind of way. Charity is about doing work that
Rabbit, I think it puts
helps people directly.
The name that you
politics isn't. It simply isn't that.
Pretty sure.
And if we look at it from that perspective,
I haven't seen anyone's real names when they.
AOC not standing by single payer is an objective form of capitulating to the
The only thing is if you subscribe to my Patreon and use your real name
even if
for
we
Patreon,
approach
which I wouldn't
this
encourage you
from a
to
very
do,
pragmatic perspective, we can see that the Democrats really aren't able to get much done. They're not able to deliver even Biden's infrastructure bill. They're not even going to be able to get that passed
Judas Priest, I'm still going on.
In the way he originally proposed it. So I think we don't have to approach this from an ideological perspective of who's more left-wing than the other. We can approach this from a very pragmatic perspective.
Frank, we are very
when we say that,
trust
people
me.
are sick of the two-party system. People are sick of the
But
do-nothing
everyone here
Democrats
admires and respects history.
and the Republicans who are just
That's
outright
something we all
corrupt.
bond on.
And there's room for some kind of
and
alternative.
It's a
AOC
strong thing to tie
promised
people together.
to be
it really
that
is.
alternative, and she's failing to deliver on that. It's not about that she's compromising. Everyone has to make compromises in politics. It's who she's compromising with, why, and the strategic significance of that. Is she doing it because it's necessary for some independent movement, or is she doing it because it's just more easy and convenient to do in the position that she's in?
Because of the debate.
All right, thank you, Haz. Destiny, you're welcome to respond.
Yeah, so I mean, like, at the end of the day, politicians represent their constituents. We can go into bigger conspiracy theories about it's all corporate lobbying or it's all, some big conspiracy, blah, blah, blah. But again, I think those are fun to get into, and it's cool because then we get to shift all the responsibility away from voters and any work we have to do to the evil boogeyman of the politicians are all corrupt and evil and blah, blah, blah. I don't think politicians are corrupt. I think that if you honestly take a look at the American people, I think that the way politicians work, it's like super predictable and it's super obvious and it's super understandable too. Like a lot of people are wondering, like, you look at statements by Lindsey Graham. This is a guy that said that he would never support Trump and he hated him. And now, you've got all these Republican senators, all these Republican congressmen that don't want to investigate what happened on the 6th. And they don't want to, they still kind of simp for Trump, even publicly. And it's like, well, why are they doing that? Is Trump paying them off? Is it a big conspiracy? Well, no, it's just Trump is really popular with the Republican Party. So, of course, the elected leaders are going to simp for Trump. Like, it's as simple as that. When you look at somebody like AOC, your goal for a candidate like that is not only for her to grow in Congress, to grow her her
my
reputation,
number
to grow
one
her
goal.
power, to maintain loyalty to her constituents.
Learn,
But you also want to get more
educate you
people
guys
like
and
her in there
entertain
in
you
the
guys all
future.
in one.
And you also want to make it so that in the future, if she's the deciding vote on something, maybe she can move some piece of legislation further to the left. But she, the far left, is not going to be the deciding vote in a left-leaning party. It's going to be the center people. Now, if we had 60 or 61 or 62 votes in the Senate, I'm using the Senate a lot instead of the House because the House is really Democrat. But if we look at the Senate, right? If you were to have like 60, 61, 62 senators in the Senate on the Democrat side, well, now the people all the way at the far left, now they have some say. They're like, okay, well, hold on. We got like 60 Dems in here. If you guys want us to come on board with this, now you need to talk to us. But when your margins are razor fucking thin, then you are constantly appealing to that center because that's where you're going to lose your leads at. So for all these people that complain about like, oh, well, they're not holding their promises,
Say what you want about Destiny,
get
but
more
he really
people in
does
fucking
understand
Congress.
Democratic
Like people look at like,
process
oh, well, look at what Lyndon B.
United
Johnson
States.
did. Look at the gains. Look at the leads that guy had in the Senate. Look at the leads of that guy in the House that he had in the House. You know, you people talk about do nothing Democrats, but when you lose your House and then you lose your Senate for 6 years or the 8 years you're a president, you're not going to be able to do anything. And you know, people talk about look at Biden's watered down infrastructure bill. Coronavirus bill that he passed with no Republican support was amazing. The infrastructure bill that we're looking at getting, even though it's scant, I think 950 billion, is still really amazing. If you want more, the goal isn't to destroy the few Democrats that you have that are giving you your lead. The goal should be to go and elect more, get a bigger margin. That's where politics are made, not on this weird infighting when you barely have a lead at all.
Okay, well, I still think the issue is that you're just confused about what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is that when we're talking about the center and the far left and all this kind of political spectrum stuff when it comes to the Democratic Party, I'm trying to say that the Democrats are not innocent for being, like they just passively reflect what the American people think in terms of like why are the Democrats centrist? Why do they have the policies they do?
It's because Obama was.
My point is that
really
the reason for that
notorious
isn't
for not
because
being willing to
that's all
compromise
the
and
American
work with,
people are willing to support. It's because the
Democrats that
American people
disagreed with
don't
him.
know of any alternatives.
There's actually
and one of the other things that's
PBS
being
did a really
ignored
good
here is that
documentary on that.
a lot of the times the American people
That he was
will
actually
vote
very
for
hard to work
candidates
with.
and vote for a slew of policies that they don't necessarily agree with, but simply because they've been whipped up into fake political and cultural divisions.
No way.
If
Oh
you
my God.
Look at on matters of specific
Holy
policy,
shit,
the American
Fosh.
people don't seem to deviate from one another so much. It's only
Thank
when
you.
they're
That's so sweet
divided
of
along
him.
these cultural lines, these artificial lines that seem to
Thank
be
you, thank you, thank
imposed from
you.
the top that you find this issue. The real question, I get your whole
Welcome,
point, like,
Raiders,
oh,
welcome.
Democrats, I know they're not able to do much.
Welcome. We are. Thank you so much for those follows, guys. I am Aristocracy. I'm a history streamer.
You're making it hard.
I try to arm you with facts and knowledge so you can come to your own political.
You're making it hard for them
And
to make the case.
thank you so much for that subscription, Ian.
Everyone is so
But yeah, I really appreciate those follows. I stream almost every day.
populism that Trump unleashed is irreversible. People
And yeah, I am on a panel with Infrared and Destiny.
to this false promise that, oh yeah, just vote for the Democrats and we'll be able to fix it all. People are sick and tired of it. There's no
I went from Vosh to Hassan. To Vosh from Hassan, and he's like, yeah. I know Hassan. I've actually talked to him before. He's really, really great. Like him a lot.
necessary and decisive portion of the American people that's going
I'm
to
sorry, you're not a fan of Infrared? I don't actually hate the guy. You know what?
any voting in a decisive way.
Yeah,
Though things did get heated earlier.
Establishment or the do nothing Democrats. The problem is that you have a gridlocked government. and you
But yeah,
can't have a
Vosh, thank you
majority
so
on
much.
both
Vosh
sides.
has been so incredibly kind to me behind the scenes.
Opinion of what people want in the United
What the?
States.
What the heck just happened?
Or is some of that division artificial? Is some of that division
What the
necessary
heck?
because the American people disagree
Oh
with
my
each other?
god.
Or is it because those corporate
But
groups or
what the
whatever
fuck?
are doing
Volps,
at least participate
Volps,
in
thank you so much. I don't know how to pronounce that, but thank you so much for those 20 subs.
What's like a fake issue that you think we're not really divided?
Oh my
on?
god.
I hear this from leftists so much.
Holy shit.
the American people want healthcare infrastructure. They want to be able to
You're
have
just,
decent living.
and I would encourage you to talk to other people.
Wow,
that are
thank
outside
you.
of your lane, because
I
when
really
people
appreciate
vote
you
for stuff
guys
like
for coming to this
healthcare,
raid.
it's just
Like,
not at all in line with the reality.
this is super cool. I'm actually a new streamer. I only started about 4 months ago.
Too much and culturalized. Now it's all socialism in Venezuela. But before then, it was
Vosh is rad, yeah.
American people wanted healthcare. For example,
No, the panel's still going on. I don't really have anything to contribute to this part of the panel. I was contributing a lot earlier.
It really depends on how he swung it, but Trump was such just like.
Vosh is dead because Eris is mommy.
I don't, they wouldn't be, oh, Trump's a social.
Well, you know what? I was having a really shitty day once, and I got, had a panic attack, and I messaged Vosh. And like, we're not like friends or anything. Like, he didn't have to be nice to me, but he was. He said something really kind to me in DMs. And he got no benefit from it. He's a good guy.
Then why doesn't some politician just come up and offer all of that? Because that's what Bernie was supposed to be twice, and he got crushed. So where is this? Where is this person to come up and just offer what they really want and then win all these elections?
Yeah, like, we have disagreements, but like, at the end of the day, like, the people behind there are good.
No, he wasn't. He was stopped because he didn't get anywhere near the amount of votes he needed. Why? Because he.
I haven't had positive interactions with all streamers, though.
The media gave Bernie
I'll get into that sometime. Though, you know what? There was some of my drama was on Destiny's channel tonight. I might talk to you guys about it after the panel. There was, yeah, I had some drama on his thing.
I don't have links to them right now, but for anybody that followed the mainstream, I don't need to cite it because I followed the media in the United States.
They're basically arguing whether or not you should compromise to achieve like socialism and change. That's kind of the kind of. I'll make it louder.
He did really well in those two primaries. Was it Chris Matthews made that statement about it was like watching the Oscars, and everybody fucking roasted him for it. He got in huge trouble for how stupid that statement was. Like there were a lot of people that were kind of sort of warming up until Super Tuesday came along and destroyed his entire campaign.
Wait, so you're saying that there wasn't any institutional opposition to Bernie, and that they didn't actually, regardless of the extent of his popular support, not want him to?
Leia, thank you so much for saying that. That means so much.
I have an answer to this.
That means so much.
Charlotte, Charlotte, please respond. Destiny, get like one last word against that, and then we're going to go to Lena, Spectre, and then we're probably going to start going to closing statements. We have 9 minutes until closing statements.
I don't even know what my closing. This topic was just not my thing because it's very American focused, and I'm Canadian.
Like research pieces, Bernie got much more positive coverage than Clinton during the 2016 election.
It's true.
Specifically because
she's right.
Like Bernie didn't have any controversies. Hillary Clinton was literally baked like in like 3-4 different like national like controversies. You had the email thing. You had the
it's
FBI
kind of not a good look to platform.
People were still hung up on Benghazi. Like all of these different things.
Right?
People literally think Hillary Clinton is like a
in
serial
killer
or whatever, right? Like all these things are hanging over her head, and like yes. There is
if you're wondering
dislike of
what my sub sound is, I'll explain to you after the panel.
People in the DNC aren't socialists.
Basically, a guy told Destiny that he's pulling an heiress. So
lawmakers not liking Bernie is not evidence that they rigged the DNC like primaries or that like they had a hand in him losing. He lost because Bernie, like as much as I love Bernie, right, and him like jump-starting partially, right? It's not all him. Like this, like new socialist, young socialist.
I don't think she's an anti-Semite or anything. I think she accidentally perpetuated an anti-Semitic narrative.
Like if
right?
Bernie,
but I always try. Like, I don't want to like morally judge.
Bernie would be.
I'll turn it down for a second. I don't want to like morally judge like one person. Like if someone says something, that I consider problematic or something, I'm not going to automatically just think they're, you know, that them as a person is like that, right? I don't believe in that kind of moral purity stuff that they do on the left. It's on average, people just perpetuate those narratives because they're just ignorant. It's like mostly comes down to that.
Everybody does that.
I've probably, as a Jewish person, I probably accidentally perpetuated anti-Semitic narratives. Like, it's especially we live in a society, guys. Okay?
Can you describe how you're using a lot of flowery language?
The way the media covered Bernie, for example.
Oh, Lena, yeah, for sure.
We only know about this because it was.
There was one time where Hillary was given questions ahead of time.
Wait, Destiny, you don't know if there was one time.
Hey, Vin.
Because that was what was leaked.
Hello. Hello from Ontario.
But what can we reasonably infer if they're willing to play dirty?
Sarges, thank you.
What can we reasonably infer?
Yeah, I almost like. It's unfortunate you're meeting me for the first time during a panel. But hopefully stick around and then you can get to know me better. What do you think about Quebec broadly? I don't know if I want to get canceled right now, guys.
West Virginia voted for Bernie. They threw out the results and they picked Hillary.
What do you mean they threw out the results of an election?
Yeah,
What
that's
do you mean?
that's
Are you
Saxy
talking
nerd.
about
That's
the
exactly
superdelegates?
my attitude.
The superdelegates would have.
It's why Vosh and I get along, because
election was not
has
being
Vosh said
decided by
yikesy things before? Oh yeah, I mean I've said yikesy things before.
It doesn't matter.
But
what
I
state
know
you're
at his
bringing up.
core,
The
like,
caucus and the primary
you know,
results are
that
caucus and primary results.
it's good
Anyways,
guy.
I would- I'll
He's
bet
trying to
my-
do good.
the life of my entire family that if we
And
go
he's the
back in
first person to
time,
tell you that he'll make
Bernie would've
mistakes.
won a majority vote in the Democratic
The
Party.
moral purity
There is
shit
no
drives me
chance that
crazy.
superdelegates would have overruled.
Chicken, it's the horse and the cart, okay? In order to win a majority,
Greetings from Mexico.
you need media. You need a
Oh, you saw my Vosh in The Sims? Yeah, I still need to continue that. That's Saxner. Thank you so much for that subscription. Welcome to the Aristocracy, the only place where, you know, leftists can get away with oppressing the lower classes.
Part of the game, saying fuck you to the Democrats and building a third party.
Okay, then do that and be irrelevant, and no one will give a fuck about what you say, and then you can cry in 4 years again when nobody elects any of your people.
I have about 500 viewers now. You keep saying be irrelevant. I'm growing awfully fast. Watch your words. You're gonna be proven wrong before you.
I thought we were talking about political effectiveness, not how many viewers we have on Twitch or YouTube. But I mean, it makes sense to me that a leftist would measure their success based on their social media engagement, I guess.
Well, it's all about engagement's a good step, isn't it?
Well, I'm like now we can point to
It
little steps
proves
that are
the fact-
effective, when before it seemed like the only thing that mattered was the most extremist legislation we could pass.
Security
The
testing,
niche is
yep.
out there, doesn't it? At the very minimum.
No, I understand that. The niche is out there, but that was my whole point. That's why everybody laughed at me when it fucking however
leftists
long
are
ago
not
I
my
said that I
viewers.
thought
Leftists
when I said that
What
I
the
thought
fuck? I don't
Biden
wanna
was going
press
to win. The reason why is
I'm
because it seemed
kidding,
like
I
the
see- I
only
was
thing
joking
Bernie
around.
ever could appeal to was a niche. But that's not enough to win an election for president.
I agree with you, but leftists are not my main views. Leftists hate me. I have a lot of ordinary people, apolitical people. Even
we're
right
not
now,
talking about you.
I
We're
don't
talking
think he's a
about
troll.
Bernie.
I
I'm
think
just
it's totally
saying in
genuine.
general, I know for a fact, based on my own experience, that the people are out there who are willing to listen to the
Poor
type
Wishy.
of things I'm saying.
Okay.
Like what I'm saying is pretty popular in general, from what I know, not just from like my streaming experience, but just my everyday life experience. People agree with pretty vague populism. It's pretty much why populism is called populism. It's a real force in America, and it's not going anywhere, no matter how much
Did he
people
just
like you respect
self-identify
or
as a
complain about it.
populist?
It's a
You're
real
pulling an
objective
Eris
and
here.
material force now.
All right, one second, everybody. We're like 3 minutes for closing statements. Do
Thank
we
you
want
so
to
much for
continue
those
this
follows,
conversation for,
guys.
like, say, like another like 20 minutes?
I'm good. Yeah.
All right, cool.
I have to leave pretty soon, so I can't. But sorry.
All right, no worries. All right. So then, Destiny, you're welcome to respond. Same thing with you, Spec. So, sorry. Right now the list is Destiny, make your last statement. Then Lena, then Spectre, then Charlotte. Then I guess we can move to closing statements because, like, I feel like if Fred wants to argue with you, like, in
Can I
particular.
just respond to the idea that I hate like the left-wing populism in this country? I voted for Bernie, dude. Like I was as
Shit on
upset as
Jimmy
everybody
Dore.
else that he fucking lost.
Jimmy just
I
shit on
don't-
Jimmy Dore because he's the only real populist left in the media.
Holy shit! No, Jimmy Dore is not, and he's.
Are we
Jimmy
doing Jimmy Dore
DSA's
defense right
Jimmy
now?
Dore?
How is the DSA populist? The DSA.
I actually didn't shit on Jimmy Dore, but I would
The
love
DSA
to.
will never
You'll
make
give me the
inroads
time to
in
talk
in
about
the
it.
rural
Like,
Michigan.
Is it
DSA 's not
populist
Mind
to,
pumping up the volume? Yeah, I
to
did. Sorry
deny
about
war
that.
crimes and berate popular politicians? Is that
If you're
popular?
gonna slander Jimmy, slander me too, because I'm pretty much in agreement with him about almost anything when it comes to foreign policy. So
Right.
why don't you say that to my face too? Let's
So
bring
let's-
up, and we
Is
can
he
bring
in
up
agreement?
the case by
Yeah,
case.
but Jimmy
things you're
Dore is also
talking
sexual
about, too,
harasser.
if you
That's
want.
my
Let's get back
issue
to
with
the
it.
AOC stuff that you were talking about.
He's a
there,
creep to
Sure, I already
anti-Syrian.
You said
I don't even
none
like
of
him.
that
He's
was
a fucking
about-
creep.
Pretty clear.
You-
AOC stuff is pretty clear.
You-
The point isn't that AOC is not being leftist enough for the sake of abstract leftist principles. It's that she's going back on what initially made her a phenomena, which
I
was
feel
a
like when
Justice
people say
Democrat.
populist,
She
they
was
just
gonna
mean
challenge the
anti-intellectual.
Democratic Party on behalf
that, like,
of
really- I don't-
popular
Am I
America,
wrong?
on behalf of the people. She failed to do that. She capitulated to the Democrats, and it just makes excuses for continuing to compromise them while gaining nothing. I'm not of the opinion that the American people are so
And I don't like that.
left-wing
That would put me out
I
of a
think
job.
Joe Biden, I'm approaching this almost from a right-wing perspective, if you want to look at it like that. Even Joe Biden is too much, quote-unquote, left-wing for the American people right now, it seems to me. So no, I'm not under the illusions that AOC has the ability to be this like huge leftist, but what she can do is relate to the sentiments of the American people and their populistic sentiments and distinguish herself from the Democratic establishment that from both the left and the right, the American people as a whole hate. The
Yeah, so
ideology
Friday,
really doesn't matter all that
Welcome
much.
back. I haven't
She's
seen you in
been
a while.
talking about single-payer healthcare and the Green New Deal her entire political career. Just
This is
last
none
week,
about-
she was shit-talking Joe Manchin weekly meetings with Exxon lobbyists. Like, that's pretty fucking populist. Like, what do you want? You said, like, I want to get back to what you said your actual criticism was. Your actual criticism earlier, what you said, can I finish? What you said was,
Leia, I understand.
What you said was, it's not about the fact that she's compromising on single-payer
it's good to have you here.
It's about who she's compromising with. Those were your words. So who would you prefer her to compromise with? Because right now she's compromising with center Dems to try and get some fucking healthcare legislation passed.
Why? Why is that? Why is she compromising with them?
Because who else is she supposed to compromise with and try and expand?
She doesn't really need to compromise right now because Joe Biden's elected, and she and the squad could have done force the vote.
Because he wants a revolution.
No, oh my
it's a strategy they're trying to repeat now. Actually,
oh my
for
God.
other things.
Not gonna do force the vote thing. We can debate that.
I'll do it any day of the week. We can talk about force the vote.
That's totally.
But just to be clear, your contention with AOC is that she didn't get single-payer healthcare passed, and the fact that she is now willing to compromise.
I'm not under the illusion she's ever going to get single-payer healthcare. But the thing is that she didn't distinguish herself. The point is building an alternative base. That's what's of decisive significance. Single payer is a sufficient rallying point to distinguish yourself from the establishment Democrats in order to do that. She failed to do that.
I'm sorry, Tony.
All right, next time I talk, I would prefer if everyone else would stop talking.
I turned to the side, it's
really
creepy. Like, look at this.
So, in the future, I would very much appreciate that. All right, we are going to go to closing statements now. Everyone gets plenty of time, completely uninterrupted from each other, and they can say whatever they want to say. While we do that, I am very excited to hear what everyone's
thoughts are.
Guys, my
closing statement's going to be so good.
And if people
You're going to be so impressed. You're going to be like, wow, she's like the smartest big brain girl ever.
I'm going to kick back and have a couple beers. So, without further ado, we are going to start with Infrared. Haz, I'm really sorry for interrupting you, buddy. You have 2 minutes.
It's gonna be
say whatever
so
you want to say,
tier.
and during that 2 minutes, you're welcome
to
plug whatever
like,
you want to plug.
wow, I don't know why I watch
Infrared.
Vosh or Destiny or any of these debate bros.
I guess my point is
the best debate bro is Aristocracy.
People to stop framing things about this fake political spectrum and this fake division along left and right as the most decisive thing right now. I do believe there's a real distinction between left and right, but I don't think you define that based on.
The problem is, I know what Infrared wants to argue for, and it makes sense, and I'm not even hating on him for it. He legally can't argue for it on Twitch.
With AOC isn't just because she doesn't.
That's the problem with this.
She's not ultra left enough. It's because even from an objective,
he wants to argue for a revolution. He literally can't do
it. Her political strategy is a
speak
fundamental
in such
failure,
vague terms.
Insofar as it's supposed to
and
be
then
a
we can't really have a good discussion. I wish we could just argue, be talking about that, you know?
Furthermore, regarding the final thing I want to say is regarding this slander of Jimmy Dore about force the vote. I will literally debate any of you any time of the week, any day of the week. I said I can't promise any time about this because I think on Twitch, political Twitch specifically, the record needs to be set straight about this because there's been a lot of smearing.
What bothered me about Jimmy Dore?
Said about Jimmy Dore.
It wasn't just that he sexually harassed someone, right? Like,
all right, thank you.
Tons of people sexually harass sometimes. Like,
you're welcome to follow
it's whatever. I know. Just say sorry.
Go ahead.
Oh shit. I think just in general, I mean, most of this conversation was American focused, so I didn't really have too much to contribute. But I just think in general, it makes sense to work towards like incremental change. And the truth is that like if you don't,
you're pulling an Eris here.
If you don't work towards incremental change, there's tons of right wingers in the United States. Sorry, I have like a thing going on my stream. It's like distracting me. But yeah, the right wing in the United States is still incredibly popular, and I feel like sometimes I agree with something that Red Charlotte said earlier. Like we can get in our heads and be obsessed and just think that the world is what is on our Twitch and what is online, and that is just not how the average human being is operating, and that's not like where that overturn window is. So you need to be slowly working towards moving that, and yeah, that's all.
All right, thank you, Eris. Lena, sorry about the conversation went away from you.
Oh my God, Tonik.
Go ahead, say whatever you want to say and plug whatever you want to plug.
You distracted me so much because I kept hearing.
First of all,
I kept hearing the sound. You're pulling Eris here as I'm trying to talk.
When you're fundamentally
I kept
running
it was like resetting my knowledge every time.
You have two options for continuing to build up your base. You can either extract concessions.
Chris, if that's true, I would love to talk to you sometime about it. Right? Like,
either looks good.
But hold it.
Compromising to get
I just couldn't even
that
focus.
Is far more marginal.
I probably sound like a crazy person.
in people's eyes.
Yeah,
It's
like
a
I'm trying to
loss.
talk, and all I could hear is you're pulling an
They
arrows
see
here.
you as
You're pulling an arrows
compromising,
here. You're
kowtowing to
pulling
the
an arrows here.
establishment, and they won't vote for you. We're not just
Hey,
speaking
Wicked
about
Supreme.
specific people's political
Welcome to
careers,
stream.
and the concern of pragmatism cannot outweigh what specifically
Chris,
we
why
desire.
are you so mean?
We
Why are you
don't simply
bullying
want
me?
things to get better in the abstract. We want
Yeah, you're pulling an arrows here.
specific things. And compromising on that will get us nowhere.
It's
also,
because
a lot of
I
people
have
in
like this person
conversation
who's like
have been,
obsessed with me,
speaking under the assumption
and he was
that
debating with Destiny, and then he said that
US
Destiny
will
was pulling
remain
arrows there.
static for the foreseeable future,
that's
and
where it
I
comes
just don't think that's the case. I think there's going to be significant
some
change
tea
in
about
the
that
near
after
future
stream, though.
because of
It's okay. It's
American foreign overtake.
But yeah, I
by
really
China,
appreciate those gift subs. Thank you. That was
sometime
really cool.
this decade, there's
Thank you so
going to be a new age of multipolarity that we're going to start seeing, and that's just the reality of it. And that's going
Thank
to
you.
significantly
Tonight's been a
change
really great
domestic
night. I'm really
politics,
happy I streamed.
and we have to be ready for that. And it's going to change a lot of things with regard to that.
Wait, which guy was
that's all.
obnoxious?
All right, thank you so much, Lena. And then you're welcome to like to plug your Twitter or whatever you want in chat as well.
Twitter.com/Lena posting.
All right, Spectre, go ahead.
Right. Oh, I was unmuted already. So yeah, I don't know. I feel if we're going to excise politicians from
Wait, was
like,
I
our
supposed
movement,
to
withdraw
push
our
my
support
channel?
of them over them.
I didn't realize that was
basically
the part.
not doing exactly what we want in the form of like grandstanding
Ben,
and
thank
just
you.
virtue signaling
I
rather than
appreciate that. I
pass
got
meaningful
so much hate by
legislation
Shapiro fans
that we're
for
probably
that
not
video.
going to get anywhere. Thankfully, as far as I can tell, this is a problem
People are so upset to see a Jewish person
exclusively
taking down Ben
almost
Shapiro.
only with like the
I don't
Jimmy
know.
Brianna Joy Gray fans that are terminally online. These people don't actually have any kind of real political power. I doubt that they ever will because they don't understand how to use it or seize it. Nice.
This
Yeah,
is payment. I
that's-
should get
that's
a Where
about
You're
fucking
Pulling
it.
the Arrows t-shirt.
All
Right now, we're
thank you,
just selling.
Spectre. Charlotte?
Was Haas just
Yeah, okay.
showing off his
so-
pecs?
just,
Is,
like a
did
lot.
I miss?
So
Is that what just happened?
I strongly disagree with this idea that like concessions are a loss, especially when the actual relationship that exists
Finish.
between
Thank you
the
so much for
Justice
those
Democrats,
bits. Thank you.
specifically the socialist ones, not just the progressive ones, because a lot of them aren't socialists. Most of them actually, only like 7 of them are. They aren't
Hey, he's
just
a good-looking guy.
like them giving. They aren't the ones
Everyone
giving
on this panel
concessions
is
to
incredibly
Biden and the
good-looking,
Biden
okay?
administration and the Democrats.
It was like
As
the
seen
hottest
with
panel
Biden's
ever.
change in policy and
Especially
appointing
for me.
AOC and Bernie to the climate committee and all these different things. It is literally Biden conceding to the left. Like, oh, Bernie wanted to do a $4 trillion one, right? Okay, I'm going to do a
Yeah,
$2
that makes
trillion
sense,
one,
enjoy.
and like he literally says it's the Green New Deal. It's just not called the Green New Deal. Like,
If you guys
the
want to know why
introduction of,
I
like,
use
this
an
left-wing
avatar, I'll
movement
totally explain
has
afterwards.
created material
After the
change,
panel.
and this material change is in fact taking place. Like, there is a chance that none of it happens because of the Senate and all that
Thank you,
stuff.
Epic Stranger.
But like, to
I
act
love it when
like
my chat objectifies me.
this is
It's
all
like
a
I
loss
welcome
and
all
that nothing is
objectification
happening.
in my
It's just
2D,
like really
my
weird.
2D body.
Also, on the Jimmy Dore thing, Jimmy Dore is a fucking fascist tool bag who spreads conspiracy theories, accuses dying
I call him a
children of
fascist.
lying for American hegemony, and like literally spreads like the most
Yeah, I'll
awful,
totally explain it.
vile
Wait till
fucking
after the
shit,
panel. It's almost done.
and he's the like epitome of garbage. Like, he is absolute trash and does not deserve a platform, and you are an insane person for supporting him.
All right, thank you, Charlotte. We're going to finish up with Destiny.
I think incremental change is awesome. I know that if all you do is like team politics on Twitter and that's the only thing you care about, then it's like either all or nothing, because who the fuck cares, honestly, otherwise. But for people on the ground, the difference between like a $1 trillion infrastructure bill and a $0 infrastructure bill probably means a lot. For people that are getting to take advantage of that extended child tax credit, for people that are getting to take advantage of the quasi UBI that was passed, where you can file an early tax return and get some of that money back month over
Leia,
month
you
over
know I
month.
have a real wasp
I think that
nest?
those people probably very much appreciate that,
like, on
and they're
my
probably going to
deck?
be more appreciative of that than they are going to be sad that they didn't get single payer healthcare. I think incremental change is awesome. Incremental change is how we got the ACA, and hopefully more incremental change in the future is how we get a public option and maybe even single payer.
All right. Thank you, Destiny. And I also want to say thank you to
Shay,
all the
thank you so much for
panelists
that follow.
for being here. I think this was an excellent
Sorry, I
discussion. I really
didn't
appreciate
get a
all of
chance
you
to-
bringing your time, your talent, all that sort of
to
stuff.
thank all the
And I
followers.
hope you enjoyed your time here. If you have any criticisms as me as the moderator, you're welcome to tell me them after the panel, whenever you want. And again, hopefully this will be up on YouTube and like in my Twitch channel for, you know, if y'all want to use the VOD or anything like that. So again, thank you all so much for being here with us. And yeah, you're all welcome to bug out as you will. I'm going to raid into Trihex, and then we're going to like just I'm going to sleep. So thank you all so much, and I hope you enjoyed this conversation. And everyone, if you enjoyed this as
See
well,
everybody.
again, if you'd like, yeah, if you enjoyed this as well, please drop a follow and all that sort of stuff. Follow these lovely people if you agreed with their takes and thought they were based, and if they're horrible, please don't harass them or anything like that. We're very into positivity here. So yeah, thank you all so much, and have a lovely evening.